taught third? That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
All right. Let me make a fool of myself.
Massive tables.
That is a picture. It's a beautiful picture. So,
Actually, was good, man.
so did you tell me I can get rid of this?
I was there through these.
Drugged up on some Dayquil.
Sorry.
Drugged up on some Dayquil.
Wow. I was there with the students. How's y'all?
So I don't need this one, right? I can get rid of this one. There's one new one right here.
Do you want it just one-sided?
No, I'm okay.
Hey, thank you so much.
I kind of wish, but
That was the wood.
We adopted twins yesterday. Thank you. That's us.
Chocolate.
We've been fostering them for about 2 years.
Peanut M&Ms.
I know, I went, oh, I'm right
Not
here.
yet.
Hey, Dan.
If I give you the eye.
Edwin, how are you? Good to see you.
Found where my little name was. Actually, it's kind of big.
Peanut, I thought you liked plain.
No, but now I like peanut because I get protein and less calories.
I might be get one of those erasable pens.
You have to make adjustments.
That'd be a real.
I know, I was gonna say it, and I was like,
Start the doodles.
In math.
Yeah, right. This month has been hard.
Right. Yeah, our question is, how they learn that? Right, right. Maybe. We should be able to tell, though, although the item level data aren't available yet. But eventually we should be able to tell because they'll release the old stuff here pretty soon. It's an interesting idea.
it is 1 o'clock. We have a quorum. This meeting has been duly posted. Good afternoon and welcome to the Board of Trustees and Superintendent's Workshop. Please stand and join us for a moment of silence and remain standing for a pledge of allegiance and a salute to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Trustees present, and starting on your left and my right are Trustee Mackey, Trustee Flores, Trustee Mitchke, Trustee Garcia, Trustee Johnson, and Trustee Marshall. Our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Michael Hinojosa, joins us, and I'm Justin Henry, Board President. We don't have any elected officials or public officials in the room today. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Hinojosa to begin discussion for today.
Thank you very much. Thank board members for agreeing and asking for this workshop. I want to kind of bring us all on the same page contextually. It was 5 cold Saturday raining in December and November of 2015 when Dr. Cashley and AJ came and worked with the board, and we didn't have a single student outcome goal back then. Since then, the district's made a lot of progress. In fact, almost maybe too much progress. And some of the board members said, are our goals rigorous enough? And do we really need to revisit some things? And so context matters. We have made a lot of progress. There's still a lot more to do, and obviously opportunities to revisit this. In addition, because of your support and your hard work, a lot of things that Dallas has actually accomplished, the Dallas Independent School District over the last few years, ended up being in a piece of legislation called House Bill 3. And House Bill 3 was passed, and it had some expectations. So what we'd like to do, also part of that, House Bill 3 has some expectations of the board. And so while we're having this workshop, we need to kind of level set about if we want to qualify for some more funds and requirements in House Bill 3, it's important that we align all that. So my staff has been busily working on making sure that we comply with the goal requirements in House Bill 3, in addition to looking at the goals that you had set before, some that we blew past, some that we did not accomplish. And so what we'd like to do for the first 25 to 30 minutes is just kind of have a level set about where we are with some goals, how we've incorporated House Bill 3 requirements, and then after 30 minutes, we'll shut up and be quiet, and we'll turn it over to Dr. Casserly and AJ to lead us through what needs to be kept, what needs to be thrown, and whatever else needs to happen. So with that said, I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Lear, and I think you've got people that are going to walk us through this deck rather quickly.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hinojosa. Good morning, Trustee Henry, board, members of the board. I'd like to start the workshop with just kind of giving an overview of the district. You can see the various demographic that comprise our district. You see the number of schools, approximately the number of employees we have, and then of course the dollar amount, the $2 billion budget. If we drill down a little deeper, just looking at as an aggregate of our accountability, you see the district earned a B rating with the state. You can see that over time we've gone from 43 improvement required schools down to 8. We have 140 schools that are a B or above. And then you can also see that we have our own school performance framework that includes just, we think that we need to look at the whole child, and so we believe that our system is a little more rigorous, and you can see that we have higher standards, we look at the whole child, and then we're including other aspects into our rating. If we go further and drill down, you can see that our strategic initiatives are listed here. One is early learning. We also have racial equity, strategic compensation, and public school choice. We wanted to make sure that the efforts that we are pursuing at this time align with the state, and so we thought it was important to put the state strategic priorities in this deck. You can see that there are 4 areas that the state is currently focused on, which is recruiting and supporting and retaining teachers and principals, building the foundation of reading and math, connecting high school to college and career, and then the last one, improving low-performing schools. I've highlighted the red area to say that's where the majority of our work today is going to be anchored. It was important to us to make sure that our goals infused House Bill 3, or at least the aspects, the components of House Bill 3. So if you've looked at House Bill 3, you see 4 different buckets. And, the first is supporting teachers and rewarding teacher excellence. Also looking at reducing property taxes and recapture, increasing the funding with equity. And then the last one is the focus on learning and improving student outcomes. And this is the area that the board goals falls into. So that's the kind of the bucket that we're gonna hang out in for the course of the day. So on the next slide, we want to just talk a little bit about the board or the goal workshop objectives. We want to make sure that we develop about 3 to 5 student outcome-based goals. We want to make sure those goals are stretch goals but attainable. We want annual targets. We also want goal progress measures. And we're looking at a 5-year timeline. And then the next piece is we want to make sure that there's alignment with HB3 and that the district will be aligned with or eligible for the outcomes-based funding. We thought it was important to highlight some of the key aspects about HB3 requirements. And so there you can see that the school boards need to adopt a plan specifically for early learning and college and career readiness. Those plans are forthcoming. And then you also see that the plans must include 5-year goals with annual targets. We need to make sure that we have an annual report to the board. We need to post those plans, both district and campus. They need to be specific and quantifiable. And then we need to make sure that our targets are really looking at the students who are evaluated under the Closing the Gap domain. A piece of, when we look at our goals, we have to make sure that we have a baseline for each goal. We have to make sure we have targets. We also are looking at our population, and then we're also looking at a timeline or a deadline. Under HB3, districts are required to have progress monitoring, and so the staff will review the progress of early learning goals as well as our CCMR goals, and we will do that on a frequent basis. So the board will adopt a monitoring calendar, and each month we will highlight either goals or goal progress measures to the board so that you can see the progress we're making throughout the year. We thought this slide would be important because as the team came together and thought about what the goals should be and what those targets are, we looked at 3 areas. One, looking at historical data or historical trend data, whether that be state, district, and demographics. We also thought we should look at anticipating the acceleration of the quality of our efforts. We've put in a lot of resources into our strategic initiatives, and so we believed really looking at the quality of our implementation would also impact our goals and our targets. And then the last piece is really that equity value and making sure that if we have gaps between student groups that we're working to narrow those gaps. So in the next few slides, we will take each goal and each goal progress measure and outline that for the board. And once we've completed that, then we would be more than happy to take questions. And of course, Dr. Casserly will be here to facilitate those conversations. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Elizalde for goal number 1.
Good afternoon, all. So starting with goal 1, you're going to be able to flip that. This is a goal that we have had previously, and I just want to touch on it very briefly. It's also one that we've been asked multiple times to really push and to ask ourselves to stretch ourselves further. So as a reminder, student achievement as measured by the state of Texas in Domain 1 includes student performance at all grades and all subjects at the approaches, which is not our target, that's not where we want our students to be, meets, which is the minimum of where we want our students to be, and masters. So this allows us to capture both growth as well as absolute performance within the Domain 1. So currently, you can see that our actual for 2018-2019 was 46, and we are pushing ourselves to move that trajectory such that we would have a 12-point increase over 5 years. So incrementally doing a +2 and then a +3, a +2, +3, and a +2. We think this is very aggressive, yet we also think it's attainable. Within that goal, we have goal progress measures so that all along the line, we would be able to provide feedback and input throughout the year so that it's not just an end of year, here we are. So that's why our goal performance frameworks are important. Goal progress measures. So 1.1, we're very fortunate that we have Dr. Oakley and her department that allows, that enables us to track our performance. We have our assessment of course performance, also known as ACPs. These are aligned and text-based, TEKS assessments, and we have sufficient data that shows correlation, quite strong correlation between performance on our ACPs and the overall performance of STAR for our students. Of course, the real indicator here is for us to intervene along the way. So we take this measure at the end of the first semester in December. So you can track our results here, and we were at a 45 this past December for the 18-19 school year, and our growth here also mirrors what we anticipate and what we are planning for in our goal attainment of a plus, ultimately being able to reach a +12 growth for the year 2023-2024. So we're proposing going from 45 to 57, and then you see the annual targets as represented there. That particular goal progress measure is essentially a mirror image of the goal. In other words, all students, all grades, all content. When you go to our goal performance measure 1.2, this is an area where we're specifically wanting to call out our inequities. And we have performance inequities specifically around African American student performance. And so we have a lot of work to do, and the way for us to ensure that we are moving that needle is to ensure that we're calling ourselves out on this particular indicator. So currently you can see our rationale for why we think this is so important that it should not be embedded, that it should be a standalone growth progress measure. We're currently at 33%. So when, in terms of comparisons, when you look at 1.3, the growth measure itself, we've attained a 37 this past year, which does indicate that we move the needle 5 percentage points, which is, that's significant, and we still have a long way to go. So what you will notice in this growth goal progress measure is that while we're working to achieve a +12 growth over 5 years, in the previous goal progress measure, in this one, we're seeking a 17-point growth. So we know we have to have disproportionate gain in order for us to ultimately reach our goal of not having this gap. This is specifically African American student achievement, all grades, all subjects, again using the domain calculation with our ACPs as our instrument to measure that. And our last one under goal 1 is goal progress measure 1.3. This one is specifically targeting when I indicated that goal 1 captures approaches, meets, and masters. Again, because meets is so important, that's really when we can say students are on grade level and not prior to that, is that this particular goal progress measure calls out the meets. So you can see there that we want to be able to move from where we are at a 32.3 to a 44 by the end of that time span. And this is very important because this means we have to continue to have students growing each and every year. It doesn't sound like it's on, but it's
There we go. The light's on now. All right, trustees, we're going to look specifically at that foundational aspect that's required by HB3. We're going to look first at reading. And on the next slide, we can see both a comparison of our trend for the past 3 years, looking at Latinx students on the top line, the whole district in the middle, and then our African American students there on the bottom line, and the goals that we're going to project. We wanted to show you this graph, and you're going to see it in the tables in a second, so you can see two things. One is, to Chief Elizalde's point, these goals are also quite aggressive over time, so you can see the slope of those curves moving up quite a bit. But also, you can see the African American line getting much closer to the district overall, and there's an explicit interest here in narrowing that gap. The following slide lists Goal 2 specifically. This is a plus 16 from our baseline this past spring of 40% of third graders at the meets level on STAR reading to 56 in 2023-24. And then similar to Goal 1, we're also providing a racial equity comparison for some of our GPMs. So we're going to have for Goal 1, 2, and 3 a goal progress measure that specifically relates to African American student achievement. And you can see here, as you saw in the first graph, African American students were trailing the district by 14 percentage points, and we want to narrow that over time. The goal progress measure, though, is not a third grade measure. It's actually a second grade measure. So we're looking at leading indicator data up through that early learning pipeline. And we're asking you, and I'm going to ask you to bear with me over the next few slides, because we're making some big tweaks. I don't know if you can say big and tweak in the same sentence. We're making some big adjustments here to how we want to look at our goal progress measures. We've had a second grade African American GPM around iStation, and we're asking you here to phase that out. We are migrating to a different assessment portfolio, and we need the GPM to match that new assessment, which is MAP. And I'll talk about that in more detail on the next slide. But basically, for 2019-20, we would continue to hold the iStation target of 51% of African American students on level in second grade. But we would set, based on this year's end-of-year data, the baseline for the next 5 years moving forward with the MAP assessment. The MAP transition not only is beneficial for second grade, this is actually a broader effort that impacts second through ninth grade. We're just pulling it in specifically here to second grade goal progress measures. And we've talked at the board table a number of times about our long-term plans to transition away from iStation. A couple of key benefits here. MAP is going to give us data that looks and tracks much more closely to what we're going to see in our STAR level achievements. You saw that on the last slide. Same students going to go from 51% to 21%, and that's because the way the test is structured and the level of rigor is going to match much more closely to what we're trying to prepare those students for in third grade and beyond. So that's one reason for the change. The other is actually a huge instructional benefit. Teachers are going to be able to set much more individualized growth targets for every one of their students. So as we at a district consider these really aggressive gains over time, teachers are going to have to take that all the way down to every student in every classroom, and MAP is quite sophisticated in how you can adjust growth targets for every student. So that's GPM 2.1. We're now going to look at 2.2. It's the second and last goal progress measure for this third grade reading goal. And this actually goes to kindergarten. So we just saw one for second grade. We're going all the way down the pipeline to K, and this is actually for all students. This is a new measure, just like MAP is. Certainly not new to the world of literacy instruction, but new to including it here as a district goal. And it's a running record, and we're going to see in a few slides examples of sort of what we're trying to get at there. But this is specifically a measure of how well...
For us lay people, could you define what a running record is?
I-
I've heard that
yes.
somewhere before, but I'm 63 now. And
We're gonna, yeah, we can do it here. So it's basically.
And there's no running involved.
Oh, goodness. Okay, we're gonna move on from
Don't ask
that.
me to do push-ups, though.
Not a physical exercise here, totally a cognitive one. A running record is basically, the running part of it is you're taking a running tally from when the child starts reading a text through when they finish reading a text. So that's the running sort of part of it. And the teacher is essentially recording how well does the student read and comprehend what they just had in front of them, the text that they just had in front of them. This is a very, I guess, research-based effective practice in reading instruction. We've had some teachers doing that on their own and some campus principals doing that on their own in the district for some time. This year, though, we've scaled that district-wide, and we're working to provide extensive training to teachers and to campus leaders around the use of running records because it is the best leading indicator of how students are doing in their reading progression. At the bottom of the slide you see in front of you, it shows you some letters. There's targets that we want students to achieve at each grade level. This GPM 2.2 is specifically around end-of-year kindergarten. So we would be measuring the percentage of students at or above that level D. And if we go one slide further, there's also a full-page copy of this text in your packet. It's at the bottom of your packet with the elephant. You can see a sample of what that means. So it can feel pretty abstract. Well, what does it mean to have a kindergartner at a level D or higher? Well, it means they would be able to read this. Elephant jumped, her bananas fell to the ground. They could pronounce that fluently and they could understand comprehension questions that the teacher may ask from that question. So that's what that GPM target is really about. The next two slides show you similar examples for first and second grade so you can see the progression of this over time. We also included a copy of a second grade text that students should be able to read and comprehend, and obviously the comparison just in the number of words on a page to kindergarten is quite a bit different. So the development that we're asking teachers to shepherd their students through from kindergarten through that third grade STAR goal is tremendous. And we set aggressive targets on third grade on top of that. All right, so we're going to shift gears from third grade reading to third grade math. This is also anchored around STAR. We're also showing you a graph of the trend, same groups, Latinx students, the district overall, and African American students. And to the right, past that vertical dotted line, the goals that we're working to achieve over the next 5 years, which again is trying to be aggressive in the overall outcome and significantly narrow the gap between African American students in the district overall. The goal would add 14 points over our baseline of last spring, getting to 56. So there's actually the same 24 target for reading and for math. And then on the next slide, you see a similar trend that you've seen already twice. Our African American students, we have more work to do. This is a delta right now of 15 points, and that would close by a third according to the goals that we're proposing. Just like with reading, we're going to set 2 GPMs with your permission, one around second grade African American students, so a specific equity GPM, and one around kindergartners overall. And both of those ideally bookend the pipeline leading up to that third grade work. This GPM 3.1 is also using the MAP assessment, so we're asking to be able to baseline that this spring and potentially come back and revise these once we get that official data point. But we've estimated this as best as we can off of the current beginning of year data that we're just collecting from this assessment. GPM 3.2 is kindergarten overall. We talked about a running record as the reading measure. We're going to use the Texas Kindergarten Entry Assessment as our math measure. And this is the second year where we've done the Texas KEA at the beginning of year. It is the first year that we're scaling it to all 3 progress measures, beginning, middle, and end. And that's in alignment with the commissioners list that came out a couple years ago. We also think it will tightly align with the new list that will come out around HB3 legislation. So we should not have to change this assessment moving forward. And this really rounds out the assessment portfolio in kindergarten. It's a criterion assessment, which means do students know certain things, and you can potentially achieve 100% on that if you know all of the things. So that gives us criterion and norm reference assessments, which is a population comparison at both of these GPMs, at GPM around kinder and GPM around second grade. And then the next slide just shows you those targets. Again, we're basing this off of beginning of year data and other assessments that we have, but because we have not done an end of year KEA assessment, this is a really close estimate, but that tracks out to a 14 percentage point increase over the next 5 years. And that is all for goals 2 and 3.
Okay, we will now, good afternoon, first of all. We will now move into the college career military ready indicators or the goals we've established. But before we do that, at your seat, we have also given you a side-by-side view of what you asked for at a board briefing. So if you would turn to that, it may be helpful, given the text is small on the screen. While we won't go through all of this, there's a few things to point out. I think the question last time we met was, what's the difference between accountability and outcomes-based funding? And so on the left side, where you see the check marks, you can see that any of those indicators that are met with a check mark allow us to achieve the accountability perspective, but also on the right-hand side, there are funding, we list the funding sources that are available. So for example, at the bottom, it's for the number 1, it lists the TSI, SAT, ACT, and if those are achieved in any of those tests and a student enrolls in college after high school on the 12th day, that of course triggers funding. Just the same for the number 2 below in the footnote, TSI, SAT, ACT, student meets the criteria in reading or math, and also and earns an industry certification or level 1 and level 2 certificate, that triggers money. And then of course the third is the military readiness, which a student enrolls in the military and takes the ASVAB, and then that also triggers. And the fourth, I failed to say, would be student meets the criteria for the assessments, but then earns an associate's degree. So we want to provide that for you, just so you'd have it, and just for point of conversation, but just want to touch that before we move into the slide deck.
So as we move through the last 2 goals, focusing on goal 4 is probably the area where we are expecting quite a bit of conversation around this particular goal, since there are some significant differences between just the accountability of being college, career, military ready versus the funding and the direction in which the board will choose to go. However, that being said, I would like to point out a couple of items. Currently, right now, this goal reads exactly as it read earlier with regard to simply being not that there's anything simple about this goal, but nonetheless, that this goal is about the accountability measures, so it wouldn't be a reflection of all of the indicators that qualify of meeting that standard for accountability purposes on the college, career, military readiness. However, as a reminder, I think you may recall that last month when we talked about these goals, Dr. Oakley had reminded us the state is making changes to particularly CTE courses that are not leading towards a licensure, certification, industry certificate, et cetera, which currently those count. They're not in a coherent sequence of course per se, and yet we're getting points, if you will, on this indicator for students that are in those courses. Those will no longer count, but that won't go into effect until the 2020-2021 school year. However, knowing that that is coming, we have chosen right now to represent what that standard, what our score would be given the new criteria, because we know it's coming. So to some extent, 2 things about what's shaded here in like an orangey color for the 2019-2020 school year. This is the best Dr. Oakley's department can estimate. The data are already collected in terms, or are finalized, because this is, as you may recall, 1 year data lag. So it's from the previous graduating class. So it's it's done. There's nothing we can do to affect it. However, all the records of collection, the data collection, there's a reason why it's a year lag. It's because it takes almost a year to get all of the information to the agency and to ourselves. And so the best right now that we can do is Dr. Oakley estimates that we would be at a 42, which is probably a little lower because there are probably some data that we haven't had access to. Am I correct, Dr. Oakley? So on the other hand, we would rather under-promise and over-deliver, as my boss reminds us. So with that, we would want to still use that if we did keep this particular goal and move that from a 42 all the way to a 58. So as you can see, that would be extremely aggressive, moving to a plus 16. We think it's very aggressive. We also think it's attainable, knowing how many students we are now moving, whether it's through our career institutes that will have industry, that will have certifications, whether it's early college, the collegiate academies, or early college high school's associate's degree, and of course, work on our curriculum that Dr. Durant does with regard to ensuring that the level of rigor in our classrooms is continuing to meet the college career readiness level. And I did fail to say at the very beginning, it might be helpful for us to think about the goals themselves as summatives or summative assessment, and our goal progress measures as formative. Because it's not about just meeting the formative goals, but rather responding to the formative data that we collect, so that ultimately the real goal, hence the goal is that we want to ensure that we take and respond appropriately to get to each of the goals. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Lusk.
Thank you. So looking at goal progress measure 4.1, it is aimed at students meeting the TSI, which is the Texas Success Initiative requirements for college readiness. And we want to move our students from a 27% to a 39%, which would be 12 points, obviously 12 points over the years. But that assessment, we can achieve that through either TSIA, ACT, or SAT, and as I noted earlier, it can be a variation of those. So a student can actually meet the reading, it's reading and math, let me just say that first of all, but they can meet, let's say, TSIA in reading, but then get a score that achieves the threshold at the SAT, and then they in fact have met that threshold for this particular progress measure. So essentially, since we started the collegiate academies, we have dramatically increased the number of students taking the TSI assessment. So beyond ACT and SAT, we have a large number of students at this point who are taking TSI, and we also have a CCMR committee that's looking at the idea of how do we offer more students TSI so that we can help them be college ready but also trigger funding.
On goal progress measure 4.2, we don't apologize for the single digit, and it's the only GPM that has a single digit. And this is because we've started, we didn't really start gaining these certificates until 2013, and that was when House Bill 5 came into existence. And even though our students are taking, say, over 3,000 of these certificates right now, they're not all on the TEA approved list. So that makes a difference. So if you see the numbers as we go along, we really don't hit the double digits until we get to 2023. And that's when the Career Institute students kick in. And this is where we've purposely structured the program so that our seniors can then begin taking these courses that count toward this certification. Richard? Also, just as an aside, this started in 2013, and this is the year that we hired Richard Grimsley to be our CTE director. Richard, anything else on that?
So while it's accurate to say that we have over 4,000 certifications earned each year by the students, the state really set a goal in about 2017 where they gave us the first list of the 74 approved certifications, meaning that toward accountability. And if you look at that list of certifications, most of them were automotive certifications, construction certifications, and health science. And we have limited programs in the district with those. The state did send out the new list for the 1920 school year. So it's gone from 74 to 244, which does increase our capacity to offer certifications for more CTE programs. Also, there is a big jump because you will see the first year that the Career Institute students will graduate. So that's when we can count the certifications that they earn in those programs. And so, as you'll see, it's a tapered growth, and then those programs, because they're purposefully structured, you'll see a significant jump.
In your packet of information, we have provided some context between the difference between a certificate and certification. The certificates are earned through a successive completion. It is slide 39. The certificates come from completing college level courses. So from 15 to 42 hours are the courses that are required to earn a level 1 certificate. And then from 30 to 51 hours for level 2 certificates. Whereas if you go to the next side, the certifications are actually credential based, where the students would take a test, and that refers to the state A through F list that Richard referenced.
So goal progress measure 4.3 measures that very thing, level 1 and level 2 certificates. And so we have achieved 317 certificates as of 18-19, and a great majority of those were in the P-TECH and early college high school, specifically Spruce, because Spruce is a CTE early college high school. A few of those were achieved at Townview as well in the business magnet, but the majority of them were achieved through the P-TECH and early college. But essentially, we're setting the goal of 500 by the year 23-24 to be achieved. And so, as Ms. Rogers referenced, level 1 and level 2 can be earned, but pervasively, our students typically have earned level 1 certificates for the most part. And then going to 4.4, I think all of us have had experiences in the FAFSA completion. We all could say it's quite a difficult process, but that's also a goal progress measure we've set to go from 67 to 77. And so you might be asking yourself, well, I know that the state is requiring basically 100%, or you can opt out in a couple of years from now, right? And part of that is the TASFA. Some of our students are not able to complete the FAFSA, so we've also, the TASFA serves as a metric that we use as well, but it's not listed on here. But ultimately, we're setting this goal at 77, expecting our students to achieve that from the completion of FAFSA.
And the reason they can't take the FAFSA is they're not documented. And so Texas has another opportunity through the Texas version of the FAFSA for undocumented students.
And I would just offer as well that through the Dallas County Promise, we've also had a good effort and emphasis on that as well. So it's been a two-pronged approach, and it's really helped us to bolster our numbers and continue to make progress through the support of our CAP vendors as well as counselors. And then the last goal progress measure, 4.5, is a little bit of a challenge in some cases, because it's getting our students enrolled. And while we have a big stake in that, and we should own that, there are some challenges with that, as you may know, but we're setting a pretty lofty goal, going from 57 to 67. And some of that also resides in our students graduating with an associate's degree. So that does trigger the number, help us move the number in a positive direction. But ultimately, we're setting a goal of 10 points up to 23-24 school year.
So our final goal is going to focus on what was an original goal when Dr. Casserly and AJ were here. I wasn't a member of the team yet, but that goal that was created by the board of students being engaged in activities at the school level. And so we start off by showing you the slide of our local accountability system, or our LAS, local accountability system. This is part of our own component that the state approved as our accountability measure. This was to round out that we look at the whole child, inclusive of participation. We also know of the research that does connect, however, in many different ways, connects participation with success. We also know it's very difficult to isolate variables because of their interconnectivity between different variables in education. Nonetheless, currently the original goal that was around extracurricular, co-curricular participation only focused on the very first identifier that you see there, student participation percentage. It was simply a participation, period. 100% of this indicator was just how many kids are participating. We know that that's not rigorous enough should we choose to keep this goal. So we've added to mirror what's in our local accountability system, that for this goal we would also then include the different categories of participation so that students do have a breadth of opportunities, not just, for instance, in what people typically think of, oh, I'm in high school, I'm in the band, or I'm in football, but rather that we also talk about some service and leadership and academics, whether it be academic decathlon, or whether it be a chess club, whether it be a language club, different ways in which students could participate. And then the other one was, are we really getting our staff members involved in the process? Many of us have experienced where it's one staff member that sponsors 6 different clubs. So is that really us incentivizing and motivating individual teachers to help support students outside of the classroom in a very specific way? So with that, we have then what we're recommending is to phase out, should we keep this goal, that we would phase out the way we've currently measured Goal 5 of student extracurricular or co-curricular participation. And you see the new one, and we haven't set the targets because we don't know, utilizing these new measures. Currently, we would need to gather the information and set a baseline. So we would want to run these concurrently so that we could close out the 19-20 school year with the current metrics, but already set the baseline so that we could then draw out some additional numbers for this particular goal as we see where we currently are utilizing the additional measures, or rather the additional criteria. The same would be true then for the goal progress measure 5.1. Earlier on, the goal just had the same goal broken down by elementary, middle, and high school. What we're calling out here is that we would actually talk about that goal progress measure 5.1 would talk about each of those 3 indicators. So the first goal progress measure 5.1 would be the participation, which used to be the entire goal. In goal progress measure 5.2, it would be about the breadth of opportunities to participate for students, not just in one particular area, that they have choices. And then goal progress measure 5.3, which would specifically measure how many teachers are really participating in spending this time with students generally outside of the school day.
Sorry it took a little bit longer, but we had a lot of information to cover, so that's kind of where we are. These are just items to consider. The board can throw all these out. You can start with different ones, but we wanted you to show you where we could incorporate House Bill 3 and make the previous ones more rigorous. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Casserly and see whatever process he wants to elicit from you about your feedback.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see everybody again. Just to reintroduce myself, I'm Mike Casserly. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools, which Dallas has been part of for decades. As a matter of fact, my very first meeting with the council was in Dallas in 1977. Some of you probably weren't around then, would be my guess.
Just you.
Yeah, I'll let you identify yourselves. So as I indicated last time around, I am not a professional facilitator. The only thing I ask of you is to be civil and constructive, and to work through any disagreements in a positive and appropriate manner. I think everybody knows A.J. Crable, who will soon be Director of Governance at the Council of Great City Schools. We're really looking forward to having him on board, and he's done great work here in the state of Texas. Before we get started, I'd like to indicate one thing that I mentioned to staff in an earlier meeting today that I think is probably worth the board knowing about. The Council of the Great City Schools, as you may know, initiated, almost 20 years ago at this point, the Trial Urban District Assessment of NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's the test you take every 2 years in reading and mathematics in 4th grade and 8th grade, and it's the only measure that you can use to assess progress across state lines. There are 27 of our member cities who take this test. And one of the things that we have been asking ourselves about the results over all of these nearly 20 years now, and that is, what kind of job are we doing overcoming some of the challenges that our students bring to our classrooms? Do we simply reflect those challenges, or do we help overcome those challenges? And do we do as good a job as the average public school system across the country? And if we can identify that, can we also identify which districts seem to be overcoming those challenges better than other districts, and maybe what are they doing to produce those kinds of results? We haven't entirely finished with our analysis, to be sure, because we're having some technical and statistical problems with the federal free and reduced price lunch data. But we are far enough along in the data that it doesn't make too much difference which of a variety of choices we make. But in general, it is pretty clear from what we have done so far that urban public schools, on average, add more value to the educational experience. They have more, present more educational torque, they add more value to the educational experience and the educational results than the average public school district across the country. When we ask the question, which of our districts seem to be doing a particularly good job at that, Dallas is a standout. Dallas is one of the top 2 or 3 major cities in the country who is producing results on the national assessment that are substantially higher than expectations. And it's substantially higher than what you would than the average public school system. Doesn't mean that your results on the national assessment are higher, but when you take all of the various challenges into account, poverty, concentrated poverty, numbers of English learners, issues of race, family educational experience, family educational home materials and the like, then it's very clear that when you do those adjustments, again, not only do urban schools do a better job of adding educational value to their students' outcomes, but Dallas does a particularly good job at doing that. Now, as your superintendent mentioned when we first got started this afternoon, I think one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that the superintendent and this board has been very clear about the direction that you wanted to set as a district academically. When AJ and I were first here, as Michael indicated several years ago, I don't recall that there were any academic goals, and if there were, they were pretty vaguely written, so it was very difficult to tell where the district was going and why. This was, if you remember back to the Harvard experience, this was the question 0. What are you in business for? And I think the answer that everybody brought to the table after that particular case study was, we're in the business of teaching kids. When you started setting those goals around academic performance of the kids, you could start seeing the indicators move, because at that point, the superintendent, his administration, and the school-based staff were all clear about the overall direction that the school district was going. Also, if you remember from our experience at Harvard, we did lots of case studies on things that appeared not to have anything to do with education whatsoever. We did case studies on Target. We did case studies on the Mothers of Rotterdam. We did case studies on McKinsey. We did case studies on all kinds of things. But what we were trying to do at the time was to draw some broader lessons about goals, goal setting, culture, use of data, community support, group decision-making, and all kinds of things that, that districts need to do in order to push their progress on behalf of their kids. And some of the most telling case studies were case studies around goals, the importance of clarity of goals, and the like. So we're going to take up where the staff has left off in the PowerPoint that they just did, and revisit the goals that you set some years ago, and determine whether or not the board is still in accord with those goals, to what degree they need to be refreshed, and to what degree do any of them need to be altered in any way. So just as an observation, before we let you do the work, is what your staff laid out, whether you are in agreement or in disagreement about it, is one of the best articulations of direction and goals and measures on goals that we have seen in any major urban school district. If we could get more districts to do what was just presented to you, urban education in this country would be much, much further along. So I just wanted to thank the staff for the great work that they did on laying out the specifics here and laying out a set of options for you to consider as you assess whether or not the goals that you saw, some of the options that you saw, are things that you want to adopt as a board, or whether or not you want to make additional changes to. This is a particularly unique responsibility of the board. Probably your most important responsibility is to hire a good superintendent. You've got one of the best in the country, but I suspect you already know that. The other main responsibility is to set the...
He tells us.
I'm sorry?
Whenever we forget, he tells us.
Oh, is that right? So, all right, it's the only time I'll say it. But one of the chief responsibilities of the board is to set the broad direction of the school district, because you were elected to reflect the values of your community and make it clear what the community wants from its public school district, since they are really paying the freight here. So when you set the initial set of goals academically some years ago, it had a profound effect in terms of orienting the administration and the teaching force towards what it is you wanted. And this conversation will be no different. Even if you stay with exactly what is put on the board by the staff, it'll have a profound effect on the overall direction. Or if you change it up entirely, it will have a profound impact on the overall direction and performance of the school district, because your superintendent and the leadership in general will want to pursue the goals that you set out for them. But as I said, they did a great job in kind of taking what had been developed some years ago and creating a new set of options for you. But what I think here is not really very important. It's what you think. And I'd like to just start this conversation this afternoon, and this really is going to be a discussion with the board. You're going to do the work, you're going to do the decisions, you're going to make the commentary. My role and AJ's role is to make sure that you have a conversation that gets you to the objectives that Pam laid out in one of the slides earlier. So with that, I would just love to hear some initial feedback on the package of goals that you heard? Kind of initial reactions and thoughts about the whole portfolio of goals. Yes.
Is that on? I'm sure everybody can hear me. It's a small room, but I'm thrilled with this. I had the opportunity to talk earlier in the week with Stephanie and Pam and Cecilia and Derek about it, and it's even since then made substantial improvement. It was great then, and it's even better now. I do have several very specific questions and comments, and I'm not sure if you're ready to get into those yet or not. But
Not yet, but
I would
we'll
echo.
get there.
Okay, I'll hold off on those, but I would echo your comment that I think this is exactly the level of thinking that every school district should have, and I would be thrilled if we, met 75 or 80% of these goals. If we can reach all 100, I'm sure this is going to be a dramatic improvement in the school district. So I would just say kudos to the administration for putting this together, and frankly, I think this meeting can be a lot shorter than I thought it would be because there's been so much great work done prior to the meeting. So
Yeah, but by the way, any school board meeting that's just a little bit shorter is probably
amen, brother. Amen.
Is a good school board, and I frankly wouldn't mind getting out here a little bit early because I've got a 7 o'clock flight across really bad traffic.
I think that sounds great.
Yep. So, other thoughts about the package, about the portfolio? Miguel.
I echoed Dustin's both feeling and praise for the level of thought that's gone into each of the goals. I think that there are certain things that we want to dig deeper on, beginning with just whether or not we want to keep particular goals, and if we were to remove them, what we'd want to reinstitute. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. I will say the one thing that has been something I've thought about since the first time we went through this process is how much our goals should take inspiration from the broader vision and mission of the district. Because our vision is to be a premier urban school district, which is extremely broad and fairly difficult to define, the goal itself to then get to. I mean, you've alluded to NAEP as a way to potentially have a standardized assessment across the nation that would allow us to determine whether or not we are that premier urban school system. So I just think it would be helpful as we think about these goals to think also about the vision and the mission, and whether or not these goals should perhaps induce a change of that or the reciprocal of that we should look at these goals and ask ourselves, do they tell us whether or not we are a premier urban district? And if there are ways to be even more nuanced with these goals.
It's a good point. I think part of the bet here is that if the district in fact comes any place close to meeting its aspirations on these critical goals, it in fact is going to be pretty close to what you and the community envisions a large urban school district, any school district, ought to be. If we have a little bit of time at the end of the day, we might pick up issues of around the vision to see whether or not you want to alter that after we have kind of a more nuts and bolts conversation about the goals. But it's a perfectly good point. Because you want to make sure that you're envisioning something critical enough to set direction around. Carla?
Yeah, I'd like to say, I'd preface with when I think about what it is that I want to contribute to the conversation, is I set myself back 6 years and I say, as a recent graduate of this district, where is it that I would envision every single one of our graduating students from DISD being able to accomplish when they leave the school district? So I'm very excited about our space in higher ed, or going into higher ed, especially around CCMR, and the opportunities under HB3 to not only bring in more resources to our district, but also hold higher standards of what college readiness and college completion can look like for our students. And so the opportunity to have every student set to have something for them after they graduate from high school, whether it's a certificate, vocational, military, or college education, there has got to be something for every student that will help them fulfill a meaningful and self-sufficient life. And I think with FAFSA completion, with enrollment by the 12th day, with industry certifications living at high school, setting up a young person at the age of 18, 17 for success like that is really exciting. And so huge kudos to the entire team, but even peeling down to the third grade level and below. So super excited to see that space and excited to continue the conversation.
Okay, great. So, Ben?
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of what I've heard, but also, I mean, this is, I think, a phenomenal starting point. The depth of all of the goals to the KPIs and everything is really thoughtful and has taken into account a lot of discussions I know we've had at the board table and in one-on-one conversations with administration about the vision for it. I keep coming back to, and to the point about the overall vision. What is a premier urban school district? Where are we at with that? Like driving what we envision, like our aspirational vision for what Dallas ISD is, and figuring out what those big rocks are, and then finding the way to measure. I think my mind automatically keeps going back, how do we measure that? How do we measure that? How do we measure that? And that's a necessary thing. But in terms of like, what are those big rocks, and then identifying how we measure it too. So I'm excited to get in the conversation about which of these goals I think are really there, which ones may or may not keep. But overall, I think this is a really strong starting point and gives us a lot to work from. And I do have some specific just questions on it at some point. I think to answer those, I think it'll make it a lot clearer there too when we get to that.
Great. Dan?
Well, I went through this the first time, and you're right, it took us, what, five Saturdays? And
It did.
We are, we've accomplished in just this short period of time, thanks to all the prep work, right here on this draft, what it took us those 5 Saturdays to do. I might have some questions about some of the actual numbers. I was a little and confused by the certifications change and how you translate the certifications that we are already given, that we have right now, into what the measurement is by the state in the future. But I mean, this is really good. This is, I think, a result of a lot of hard work and the fact that we've been doing this for several years now.
Good. Maxie, any thoughts? No? You okay? Edmund?
So, I was here during those, 5 cold, November, December.
Oh, rainy,
It was
yeah.
raining and snowing and sleeting. And I think that this is really kind of a very thoughtful transition from the original thinking. My experience, the problem has always been that the state keeps on moving the goal line on us. And then they change the field on us. And then they move the goal line again. And I feel that we now have something that we can actually just, for at least the next 5 years, have some stability that we can kind of work the problem and work toward the solutions and work toward the implementation. So I think that that's also important to bear in mind, that I remember TAS and I remember tax and I remember, it was just this continually rolling, changing set of goalposts.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing that I think is important is to narrow, because you could have 100 different things you measure and you're never gonna get any of them done.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have the goals, but then also have those benchmarks, those goal progress measures, and exactly how we're gonna do it. And, we are transitioning to test. Well, then, this is kind of a very good time to reset those numbers, and then have some idea of what this is gonna be. And it may be that 6 months from now, when we start getting some of this data, it's a different number, and we just have to change,
Yep.
What we're gonna be.
So, and to your,
Goalpost, but.
yeah, and to your point about numbers of goals, we're going to encourage you to stay within the 5 that you have. I think once, we've all talked about this before, once you start getting over that number, then it becomes increasingly hard to meet any of them. So Joyce, thoughts?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'd like to.
She'll let you know,
While
don't
she's
worry.
thinking, I'd like to make another comment, Mike.
Okay.
I'll take the privilege. Not only were the goals profound, the process, it was, here's what, to get a product, if you involve the stakeholders, follow a process, then your product is much more pristine. And that's what we did. The stakeholders at the time were the board and the senior staff. We followed the process that y'all guided us through, and our product was pretty good. And while we've made a lot of progress, there are a lot of other things that have also happened, and I'm gonna mention 3 specifically, that if we hadn't had the goals, we wouldn't have even gotten started on this. The first one is extracurricular activities. And we went from a very simple goal to 300 robotics teams, to now esports, to, I mean, the things that blew up all over the district. When I would go to a campus, and at that time it was goal 6, before AJ said we couldn't have 6. and principals were wearing t-shirts, goal 6. We want more robotics teams, we want more chess teams. So that one by itself had a big impact on the culture of the district. The second thing I want to talk about, the next 2, is we kind of had a premonition. And of course, we had Mike Rath as a member of the board at that time. But when we stumbled into this P-Tech thing, and now how kids were getting associate's degree, and when we started that journey, 15% of our kids got a credential 6 years after high school. Now, next year, we could have close to 15 to 20% with an associate's degree before they leave high school. And then Edwin and other board members talked to us about these different ideas that we now are calling the career institutes. And back then we also had a little bit of pause about it's got to be refereed to be an industry certificate. If you just get a Microsoft Suite certification, well, everybody learns Microsoft on your own. Is that going to help you get a big job? I doubt it. So I think just by having those out there pushed all of us to be creative. And then even like the career institutes have had several iterations. The P-Techs have had several iterations. The same thing with our strategic compensation. We've had iterations. But it was all stimulated by these kinds of conversations. Then other ideas just emerged along the way. And hopefully that'll be the same process with whatever we come up with next, whatever you come up with next.
So, thank you. Justin, any initial thoughts about just the whole portfolio of draft goals?
First, I just want to thank the administration for spending the time to come up with something. I wasn't a part of these previous board workshops, but given what the veterans on this board have said, you've accelerated the process by the due diligence you put up front, so I greatly appreciate that. I do want to just, give a bit of thanks to all the trustees. We have all of us here now on what I think is one of our most responsible roles, most important roles. And I think this board is incredibly dynamic and different and diverse. We have the youngest Latina ever to sit on the school board. We have activists. We have folks that have been working in this community for decades for our kids. So the idea of us coming together on some goals that really can set a vision for this district is critically important. So you've done your due diligence up front. It's now time for us to do our diligence and look at this. And does this reflect what our community sends us to this board table to do for our kids? So excited about this. People say we're going to get done with it today. I don't know about that, but we'll see. I don't know if you'll make your flight. Sorry to be the,
don't go through downtown. Go around.
Yeah, but I'm really excited about this process. I've been kind of, as y'all know, kind of pressuring us to get a date on the calendar we can do this. This is why we get elected to sit on the school boards, to do this stuff for our kids. And this is one of our primary roles. So excited about this. I looked at it, it's great. There's a lot of academic focus and extracurricular focus, but we're also an elected board. So I will always talk about, kind of the community aspect and how we're communicating with the community and how they're also engaged in these goals and processes and how they're reflected in them. So I'm excited.
Okay, great. It sounded like a number of you might have had some clarifying questions that would help you as we have conversations about the goals themselves. So I want to let you ask the questions of staff, any technical questions or clarifying questions about particularly this document, so we can get that clarity established as quickly as possible. So you indicated that you had one or two?
Mr. Cashley, can we?
One or two? I didn't say that.
If you're going to ask questions too, can we kind of, if we start with Trustee Marshall and go this way, and the next time we'll start with Trustee Franklin and go this way?
Okay.
If there's a series of questions that you're going to do.
Got it.
I have more than a few, but I will get started.
Anybody have a short number of questions?
You can cut me off.
We'll cut them off at this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I love the first 3. So Derek, you're off the hook. I don't have any questions for you. I think goal 4 is a lot tighter than it was when we talked on Tuesday, and I appreciate you guys making this more tailored towards the HB3 funding, outcomes-based funding rather than just the accountability piece. I'm interested in if we've done the analysis to know how much money we would make in each year if we hit these targets from the funding mechanism.
I don't think we've gotten yet with Dwayne. I know his team they can run it like in a couple of days. He's been able to generate when we give him targets like for the teacher incentive allotment piece. So we have not done that, but we certainly could. We certainly can and will.
Do you know sort of intuitively, directionally, like if we're talking like mid-single digit millions or like teens or 20s or?
I think I can answer part of that. In some of the previous runs that I have with other trade organizations that we're responsible for, just let me give you the example. Like for the teacher incentive fund, we could qualify for between $30 and $40 million annually for that fund.
I'm just talking about
But
CC
for
Mark,
this one,
yeah.
a similar ballpark, somewhere between $10 to $12 million that we would qualify based upon what the opportunities are. It depends. Some of these are rather long-reaching. After you graduate, then you have how many days to enroll in college?
12.
Yeah, 12 days, so some of those are gonna be more further reaching, and then you gotta get the data.
Yeah.
But up to 10 to 12 million annually, and some of this money's gonna be available now.
Yeah. So, given the funding mechanism in place, I feel like the ramp up of the targets on goal 4 is really low. Because I get that you're looking at historical trends to project the speed at which we would increase going forward. But given that we're going to have $10-12 million extra to plow back into CCMR, it seems to me that looking historically isn't the right method for forecasting the future, because we haven't had that $12 million and now we're going to have it and be invested in it, investing back in the CCMR. So to me, while I think the ramp up on the first 3 goals makes a lot of sense, I'm concerned that the 4th one needs to be a lot more aggressive. And I think that if we were thoughtful about how we're going to reinvest that money, that we could find our way towards doing a lot better in our 5-year objective target, and then the ramp up towards that.
Okay, could we just mark this down as one of the items that we should take up with the broader group?
Okay.
So just the acceleration of those.
Talking about just 4.
HB 4 in general.
The macro goal 4. But then to that point, Edwin, if you get into some of the GPMs, 4.3 also looks exceedingly low to me, given that we're launching the career institutes. So, to me, the 317 we did without having these 4 career institutes in the quadrants. And I know they're not there yet, and we'll be ramping into them, but if we can do 317 without having any career institutes, getting to 500 in 5 years with career institutes seems really.
I think just a point of clarification, these would relate to P-Tech and in the Spruce, for example, early college, high school, because this requires a course sequence of about 15 hours to 42 hours for a level 1 cert. And then the level 2 cert would be just above that, is noted. So I think you may be referring, if you're thinking about the career institutes, that would be the certification.
Is that 4.2?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. So the certifications in 4.3 are only coming from early college high schools?
The P-Techs, yeah.
From the dual credits.
From dual
Okay,
credit.
all right, then that makes me feel better. Good. I also wonder, and I don't have much mathematical basis for this, but on GPM 4.5, that one seems like it's ramping slowly to me too. 10 points in 5 years. I just would push back that one could be a little more aggressive. Then my other question, and this is, we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday, but for 5.2 and 5.3, I know we don't know what the targets are, but I'm still interested in understanding how that's being calculated. Like what Stephanie, you mentioned that you had something you could send me on that. So if you don't mind sharing that either today or later, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I think part of that is we're doing that data gathering right now. Charlotte Hudspeth with Sherry's team ensuring how many of the different categories are represented. And so as soon as we get that, we'll certainly send it to everyone.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not talking about the number or I get that they need to be X's right now. I'm talking about the method of calculation. Like, I don't even understand what that means, really. Like, when
Brian,
you say,
do you recall how we did it for SPF, for School Performance Framework?
I don't recall the level of detail. I have TOA here, but I don't think it's going to get to the heart of what.
Okay, see if we can find that while we have the board here. If not, we'll have to get that information, the calculation method.
Yeah, I don't want us to get too far along on this in case the group decides this is not what you want to do.
yeah, okay, fair enough.
Okay.
So then the last major thing that I'm wondering about is the fourth objective at the state level is reducing underperforming schools, and we've talked a lot about getting rid of F schools, and I know Stephanie's got an even more ambitious plan to get rid of all D schools in a few years, and then eventually get rid of all C schools as well, which would be an incredible achievement. But I would love it if that were reflected somewhere on here, and I'm not quite sure I know a good place to put it, because I'm not sure it fits squarely under any of these 5 goals. But getting to the place next year where we have no F schools, and then by year 5, getting to the point where we have no F and D schools is something that I would really like to see on here, and it might go under goal 1. I'm not sure where it could go, but I would love to see it included.
Okay. The reason it's probably not on there at the moment is since HB3 and other initiatives have encouraged student outcomes focus, that's more of a school or a district or an institutional goal than a student outcome goal. So it may be, I'm just doing a hypothetical, I don't know for sure, but why don't we keep that on the table for subsequent discussion.
Okay, and then my last question is more one of the plan for today. We just passed a superintendent contract extension that has an incentive structure in place where we're allowed to set up to 7 superintendent goals for the next calendar year. And I'm wondering if the intent of this meeting today is also including some discussion about what those goals are and how they overlap with these goals. Because from my perspective, the 5 goals that we set today, whatever the target is on those goals for the next year, should also be incorporated into the superintendent's incentive plan.
Let me address part of that. Trustee Mitchke is the chair of the superintendent's evaluation instrument. Now, what's also critical is that we settle on something rather quickly, because my evaluation instrument needs to be modified, and we're already a quarter into the school year. And for anything to be actionable, needs to move quickly. But if there's, and then that's one piece. The second piece is this superintendent's incentive, which is similar, related, but different. And so the board will need to deal with how you manage that. But I think there is some urgency that if we're going to change the current goals, we're already into the academic year, and we need to get something done quickly on that. So I don't know where the board wants to go on that.
Yeah, I didn't think that we were necessarily going to try to take up the incentive goals today. We'll be lucky if we can nail down the 5. So if a subsequent session needs to be held, I think we can arrange that to happen, but I don't know that we're necessarily going to tackle it today.
Well, and to be clear, I'm hopeful that there doesn't need to be a subsequent session, because I think that whatever these 5 goals are should be the goals that are in the incentive plan, which means that there isn't a need for another conversation, because whatever we decide on is what's in there. So that would be my
as far as I know, we're not going to do the incentive goals specifically today.
Okay.
Okay. Miguel?
So I think what I'll do is just propose a potential set of big level changes, and then see if there might be any appetite for that, however you would want to navigate that process, whether it's immediately or later on. I do think, though, that there's something to be said about looking at goal 1 and putting ourselves in national context conversation as well, and trying to figure out, to determine the weight of, or the merit of putting in a goal or elements of the language in this specific goal around things like NAEP. And the reason why I'm kind of stuck on this thing is, first, since this last process, I've thought about it. If we are going to truly be the premier urban district that we ultimately intend on being, I do believe those data perhaps are as relevant as the more regional context data, in this case, the state of Texas data. I don't know how you fuse two different types of outputs, data outputs, into one specific goal. But the reason why this matters so much, I think, is because we've got access to new data now that show the projection of a kid's outcome literally down to the neighborhood through tax data and census data. And we know if you live in Oakland, California versus Dallas, Texas, you're a little more likely to have a more successful life. And one of the reasons why is because of the school system. And we can run these data literally across the entire nation. So the reason that's relevant to me is because if a kid in Dallas ISD is doing great as it compares to Houston ISD, but that kid is doing significantly less a good job than a kid in another state, I think we need to own that too, especially if we want to begin to dictate to the nation what a premier urban district should look like. So that's something I think to consider, potentially embedded within Goal 1 or its own specific goal, or not if there's no appetite for it. The other thing to be said is, I think it's pretty clear now, given how much we've paid attention to it, that middle school really matters in DISD. And for far too many kids, they begin to get behind the curve at the middle school level. We're sort of probably beginning to fix that with the long-term investment we've made in early childhood education, but I still also think that we're adding additional resources into this new middle school program. It may be worth the time to consider a goal very focused on middle school, which then means if we were going to go in either one of those routes or adopt both of those, now you're getting in what Edwin said, where you just do too much. I think, given the massive improvement in Goal 5 in just a short amount of time, were we to go the route that I'm suggesting or any other route, and we needed to nix a goal, this might be an area where we would consider doing it, so long as we truly believe that the notion of a kid getting a holistic education is so now embedded in the culture of DISD that we wouldn't lose it if we move the goal. So.
Okay. Ben?
So I actually have clarifying questions, which is what I thought that was going to be. What grades do we have MAP at? I saw that used
2nd through 9th.
Yeah, it's 2 through 9.
2 through 9. Every single student 2 through 9 takes MAP?
It's supposed to this year.
Cool. And then for the TSI, I noticed the one goal you had, 4.1, the KPI on that, was TSI moving from 27 to 39. And is that calculation only inclusive of TSI and not ACT, SAT?
It's inclusive of all three.
So that's inclusive of all three.
And the reason it says TSI, it's really the Texas Success Initiative, not the TSIA. So it includes TSIA, ACT, and SAT.
So I guess if we're talking about the overall CCMR goal was 42 to 56%, and now is that essentially aligned with the House Bill 3 funding objectives, correct? The 56%?
Well, it is with certain elements, because remember that encompasses, the goal encompasses all of the accountability measures.
So the goal is just the overall accountability CC. Gotcha.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, that answers that question. Okay. And then if we are on the part about sharing, about talking about larger goals, I got some other things to add there. So, I mean, I love the idea that, House Bill 3 funding is taken into account. I want to, again, push us to think about, there's reasons like House Bill 3 is funding because it is in what the state sees as best outcomes for kids, but I don't think the funding itself should dictate it. Obviously, it's smart to think about it. Goals 2, 3, and 4 are essentially required in House Bill 3. So I think we can, those pretty much said, we can talk about the metrics. And I think that'll be a viable conversation. But I also, the idea of like this national stage, I think makes sense. I think also to consider maybe rather than talking about more and different types of tests, maybe there's a way to fold that in with MAP. If that's the case, if we're going 2 through 9 in MAP, and we know we've picked it because it's got great correlative statistics, and that's nationwide, maybe that's a way to do that inside these other elements, instead of looking at a bunch of disparate measures. And the other thing that I want to see, I also agree that, we've done a lot of great work on extracurriculars. I think that, to me, demonstrates what we put in these goals. Things happen, not because we necessarily plan them, but because it turns the attention there. So all these robotics, esports, et cetera, we've done some great things there. And I just, personally, I think we've done a lot of great things there, and if we were to remove that goal, that doesn't mean we stop doing that, but now we have to focus on other things. And the one thing that I want to put out there is, like, I would envision in my aspirational vision for Dallas IC to be a premier school district includes making this the place to be for excellent principals and teachers that want to stay there and continue to go in that direction. And I think that aligns with student outcomes as much as any specific naming a test and saying we're going to grow there. So I don't know how we fold that in with regards to retention and recruitment of excellent teachers and principals that have great outcomes, incentivizing them to stay at their campuses, and what does that look like as we see a school turn around, whether ACE or otherwise, where we see someone go from an F to a B school and maintain that. If we're seeing those same teachers, principals, counselors stay there, I think that's a really powerful thing. And it hits, when we showed the state priorities, I mean, that's number one in state priority. It obviously ties to House Bill funding. And I think all the research shows that teachers and principals are directly related to the student outcomes there. So we have systems around that we're working and tweaking to measure it and measure it better. They're not perfect, of course, yet, but I think if we could think about something like that, that would be an interesting area that I would like to see us explore as we go forward there.
Okay. Edwin?
So, I think that those are all very good points. I mean, the only challenge with using something like NAEP is that it's every other year, and it's not every student, right? It's like a pick and choose. They choose the school. So one year it's Dealey, and one year it's, fill in the blank, a school that maybe is not performing as well, right? Or doesn't get to choose its kids. So that's the problem with NAEP, is that it's every other year, and it's so random, and it's not like we get to choose. Now, if there was some other way to measure that, that'd be great, but I just think that there are challenges with,
Okay.
Why don't you say, well, we'll do PISA? Well, because that's international, but it has the same challenges, right? And then would you then start doing NAEP test prep across the district? Well, now you're adding kind of more, and PISA's a whole different type of test even. You're gonna do PISA test prep. So I think that, there's a lot of stuff we can chew on. That was just when you said that, I was like, except NAEP is a little, I'm not sure it's used to measure that.
Yeah, the other thing, but just by the by about NAEP, is that it's not necessarily aligned, terribly well with the Texas standards or the Texas test. So you could have variation on your NAEP results for reasons that had nothing to do with your instructional program. So it carries some risks with it.
Yeah, I think that.
Influence in the state to do other things. I'd suggest that our standards are probably pretty low.
Well, but MAP, I think MAP is maybe a better.
Can you explain MAP? High level. So it's 2 through 9. What other states are using MAP, if any? I mean,
It certainly can be more than 2 through 9. We're using it 2 through 9. There are other districts within this state that use it. Fort Worth uses it actually K2. Austin is looking at it for other places. Plano up the road uses it for other things. And then it does have a nationally normed sample as well. Those are 3 districts I know here close by that use it. It's a computer adaptive test. So it is computer-based. Student it logs on. It asks questions, and then it adjusts the level of difficulty of the questions based on what you're seeing. And it's reading and math. There's different versions on whether you want more support in the early learning space, or if you want it to be more traditional sort of grades 2 through 9, 2 through 12, et cetera. I don't know if that's like high level, mid level, or what, but
It's a very well regarded test.
So following on the, I think the point about middle schools, I mean, can't be understated. I think that, you know, I believe that you don't change what you don't measure, and what you measure publicly changes faster, which is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the extracurricular goal, and maybe, you know, not losing, you know, keeping it in some form. And I don't know if it's possible to have a miscellaneous goal where you could have middle schools and teachers and principals and extracurricular.
a goal
and we'd
where
all be
nothing else
happy,
fits.
But
Got
now
it.
you're adding all sorts of
So
complexity.
let's take up the three goals that HB 3 is specifying. This is the early literacy, early numeracy, and the college career military readiness goals. I don't know exactly the degree of mandate behind this, but it does come with incentive. And it does sound like the board, but I'm testing this out front, that you want to stick with some variation of those three goals that are specified under HB 3. So,
That's required by law, as far as I understand it.
yeah, I don't know
It's
the
not
nature of the.
required, but you don't qualify for additional funding. It's a carrot and a stick. So they're incentivizing the behavior that they want. If you do this, then you're eligible for more funding. But you
So-
won't get in trouble if you don't do it, but you will get more benefits if you do.
I think that's kind of decision number one that the board needs to make, and that is, are you going to play in this space? Or are you going to build three of your goals around what the state is incentivizing? It sounds like some of you care more about the money than others of you care about the money, but the money is not irrelevant either.
The money's a great factor, but these are bookend goals. I mean, we're one of the hardest matter at the earliest stages.
Yeah. Yeah, they're perfectly good goals in the way that the staff has translated them for all three areas.
Can the administration clarify, because I'm often wrong, but goal 2 and 3, there's not monetary incentive. Those are just expectations or mandates or having a framework from the state, but then there is money tied to goal 4 from the state?
There is money tied to goal 4, yeah.
So what about 2 and 3?
No, there was legislation proposed for it, but in the end, it got stripped out.
Okay.
So you're correct.
Okay, so that's helpful information. So that's what the monetary incentive is tied to, is 4, not 2 and 3. But the kind of initial question on the table for the board is, shall we stick with those 3 goals that are being incentivized in differing ways by the state? Early literacy, early numeracy, and college career readiness, and military readiness, in approximately the way the staff has outlined. And we can get into the specifics of the wording to make sure that it matches what you want, but I'm trying to establish, at least initially, do you want to go with these 3?
Well, I certainly would want to try to get the money from the state, but that's not why I like those 3 goals. I mean, those are 3 goals I would choose even if the state hadn't chosen them.
Yeah, they're 3 perfectly good goals. Anybody disagree? Carla? I don't think you're disagreeing, you're
Yeah,
just
no,
commenting.
not necessarily disagreeing, but pushing into the space of middle school, because the way that I wrote down just the general overview is we're looking at academics, 3rd grade reading, 3rd grade math, CCMR, and extracurriculars. So if we're going to introduce something in the middle school space, then to me it makes sense to look at, there's goals that we have broken down, looking at 2nd grade and even kindergarten, which I think is the perfect stepping stone to making sure that those students are ready as they progress. But I'm also thinking ultimately at that 12th grade student, and then remediation is a huge issue for DISD, for a lot of students, particularly here in DISD. When we take a look at students who are in 8th grade taking, pre-algebra, and this amount of students that are essentially on track early on before they even get to high school. So if we were to build a goal, academic goal, beyond the early grade literacy and numeracy in the middle school space, I think that's a perfect setup that goes from early childhood, those earlier grades, middle school, and then leads on to CCMR. So just a,
Okay, you could put middle school language as one of the indicators under goal 1 too, since it's a broader goal that includes middle school grades. But it sounds like the state's incentive here is early, not the middle schools. So I don't know whether inserting middle schools in those kind of undermines what the state incentive was, but it sounds like their objective was early grades, not necessarily later grades, because they've got the college readiness picking that one up. You could do it under goal 4 too. Joyce?
Just piggybacking on Carla just a little bit. One of the challenges that I've seen often is what's going on in our middle schools. And so when I look at the goals, none of these goals really reflect that. And if it's not reflecting that, you're gonna do what you have to do to what we're measuring. And so we're not measuring what's going on in our middle schools. And it actually starts in elementary, it doesn't start in middle. These kids get to middle school because they've missed a lot in elementary school. Absolutely. And so we have to, I mean, if we're gonna do goals and we're gonna be honest with ourselves, we've gotta look at where the real issues are. And while I understand monetary incentive, that's not what always motivates me. What motivates me is making sure that these children get what they need. And we have struggling middle schools in this district. I mean, probably every trustee in here has a struggling middle school. And so there needs to be some goal that addresses, I think I'm hearing that from Carla. There needs to be some goal that we look at that would address the middle school issue.
All right, so I'm hearing quite clearly that there's some middle school component that needs to be called out in the goals. But it sounds like goal 2 and goal 3, the literacy and math goal at the early levels are good. Okay, again, we'll park the middle school here for just a minute. Yep.
Okay, you were asking for some general comments, and one general comment I think is consistent with what Dr. Hinojosa said about the incentives in the superintendent's contract. I think there's obviously a relationship, but they need to be considered separately, because some of the incentive goals that we are thinking about for the superintendent's contract have nothing to do with these goal progress goals that we're talking about here. Things like market share. There's some discussion about whether an incentive bonus is payable if the bond passes. There were some other possible things that are not in this group of goals that can't translate into the.
Yeah, we're mostly just focusing on the student
right.
Goals.
Right. So when we look at possible incentives that focus on student goals, and then obviously we should try to be as consistent as possible. But I do think that when we talk about the superintendent's evaluation instrument, that a lot of what's right here should be the starting point.
Should apply.
For the the evaluation instrument.
Okay.
The other thing, and I don't know if this falls within the appropriate scope of what we're talking about here, but on the career certifications, I wanted to get some background on all of these changes. That when we were trying to match ours up with the state originally had 75 categories. Now they have 200 and something categories.
So with House Bill 5 in 2013, that really focused districts to look at endorsements, and those endorsements are planned programs of study where students are doing 4 courses in a coherent sequence. In addition to that, they encourage districts to start giving certifications. So we did that in Dallas ISD. We have averaged anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 certifications earned by students in grades 9 through 12 every year. What occurred about a year and a half ago is the state said many of these certifications that are being earned by students are not considered end-of-program certifications. So then they implemented the list of 74. And think about it this way. Let's talk Microsoft Office. That is a certification that many of our freshman level students take, but the one that is on the approved list is the expert level. So we would continue to still give certifications that are not on the state list because we are building skill sets to get them to that end of program certification. So the ones that are really on the original list of 74 and the new list of 244 are really the ones that are going to be earned by seniors because they've had to take several courses to be able to prepare to be successful on those exams.
Okay, so if we translated the 4,000 or 5,000 a year that we've been able to obtain under the old system in the absence of HB5, what does that translate back to under HB5's more narrow, restrictive?
So really what it came down to is, and I know you were looking at percentages, but it really came down to that for the data year where that list of 74 came into play, we had 66 students earn a certification that was on that state-approved list. And then now with the expanded list, we'll have more capability because that original list was really construction-focused, automotive-focused, and health science-focused.
Okay,
So we're building up, to be honest, from 66 toward a bigger goal.
Yeah, I want
think AJ had
to offer some context. People keep talking about the state. I'm here, so might as well answer some questions for you. First, this transition. Part of the larger vision here across the state is 60 by 30. Is something folks are familiar with. And so the idea here is that if we know that the propensity of jobs across the state by 2030 that are going to require something post-secondary to really allow folks to be able to take care of the needs of their families, then the statewide vision is what are we doing to calibrate for that now? And so that's a large part of the thinking behind the modification of the list. It's exactly the point you say, that there are certifications that you can get, but it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to meet the needs of your family with that certification. And so really trying to look at what are the certifications that are higher that really could help be family supporting. I think from a governance perspective, you can set your goals around whatever you want. If what you want is to have a goal around all certifications, you can certainly do that. I think what your administration has proposed, however, is to narrow in on just the certifications that are aligned with this larger state objective. Obviously, being a state employee, I endorse this position. But to be clear, as a governing body, if you see a set of certifications that don't meet that threshold, but that y'all think matches the vision and values of the communities that you represent, then have that conversation with your administration. But that's the rationale behind the shift from the state perspective, which I think is what gives rise to the rationale behind the shift on the part of your staff. I think what's exciting, if I'm serving, still as a board member, I look at the major jump that they predict in terms of how many students they believe will be able to obtain these type of certifications. This goes back to a comment I think Dustin made, which at the agency, something we say often is it's not the goal, it's what the goal makes you do. And so what the goals that you are setting or making your administration do is significantly change their operations in order to be able to accomplish these things. I think their ramp-up period on your goal 4 largely meet a lot of the expectations that I've seen when I'm looking at similar data around the state in terms of how long does it take to go from here, that there's such significant operational changes that that's not something I would expect next year and only partially the year after. It's really the year after that that you should expect to see significant gains, and that's actually what I largely see reflected here in this.
Okay, well, just to finish up this point, I'm in agreement that we should make the shift. But my question is that what we have been doing in the past in terms of, I guess, having little C certifications as opposed to the ones that match up to the state that we're going to be using our goals as our goals. I thought those smaller certifications were helpful to students in giving them the feeling that they were accomplishing something and keeping their interest. So is it your plan to continue to do that, to continue to sort of give those small C certifications, as I've called them, at the same time would be measuring based on the larger state?
The answer to that is absolutely. One of the things that we do is we collect all certifications given in Dallas ISD, and we work with Cecilia's team to upload that into our student data systems. So no matter what they've earned, it's in our systems. And the reason for that is if students end up as a 12th grader and they have not passed all their state assessments, a committee can meet and they can determine that they could graduate a student if they believe they are career or workforce ready. So that data being in the systems gives counselors the opportunity to see what all they've earned while they're in high school, and if they believe they've met that mark, they can go ahead and issue them a diploma.
Okay.
Yeah, and this idea of using what you say, the lower C certifications, to kind of scaffold up students to in eventual pursuit of the ones that kind of have this higher threshold of future earnings potential. That is a really consistent practice with what I hear school districts around the state doing.
Okay, Joyce?
So the certifications have been great for a lot of the students, and we know that. What I don't want to see us do is the little C's go away based on what we're trying to measure. Because again, if we're driven by money, and that's what I think we said that goal was, is driven by incentives. So if we're driven by money, then that's what we're gonna do. And so somehow we need to make sure that while we talk about it around the table, the small C, that the small C is incorporated in what we're trying to do. I don't have a problem with being driven by what the state wants and trying to get additional dollars. What I do have a problem with is being driven by the state and not serving our kids. That's what I have a problem with.
Okay. It sounds like what you're saying is that's not really what's likely to happen.
It hasn't happened yet because we haven't had this go this
Right.
way,
So let's, so let's keep that one live. I want to start pushing a little bit. Goal 2 and Goal 3, as they are articulated. It sounds like you're okay with them.
Yeah, and we might push back too, because I want to make sure we get all the voices of our board. I know you're trying to get the schedule, I understand.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate the comments about the middle school, so just on the record with the staff, so they hear that from
Yeah,
our
so
perspective.
I'm going to
Colleagues.
take that
And I'll let they
concept
put it
of
in
middle
2 or 3.
school up with one of the other goals.
Okay, and then the other aspect about for a premier urban district, also being a premier place for educators, staff, administrators, this is where people want to be.
Yep.
Articulating the same thing that Trustee Marshall informed, I think you're saying the same thing, that I think they're good goals. Trying to balance getting the good goals with also getting the incentive from the state. And I just wanted that on record with my colleagues in the administration.
Yeah, I've heard kind of a number of different issues, including NAEP, middle school, the issue of targets and their speed, teacher recruitment, and small C certifications that we still haven't dealt with.
Can Trustee
and middle schools.
Can Trustee Mackey go back and reiterate what you'd like to see concerning the teachers and principals and fit those into the goals? Because I heard that, and I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying, because that's important.
So I can
I want to jump in on this point. Again, part of my role is to highlight, the larger governance framework. What you all do with it is your business. That you have a sense of the framework is fine. So, when you all are determining how you're going to evaluate your superintendent, when you're determining how you're going to set your policy framework, there are really two messages that a governing body sends to its superintendent. The first message is, what is the vision of our community? Where do we want to go? Where is it that we want to get to? And the second, the values of the community. What is it that we don't want to see happen along that journey? I like to think about this like when I call for an Uber, the first piece of communication that I give to my Uber driver is where exactly it is I need to go. I literally type that in. That's the first thing that they know is what's the destination? Where are we trying to get to? The other thing that I give my Uber driver is if there are any specific things that I don't want them to do along the way. Hey, let's get to the airport, but I don't want to take this particular highway because I know it's congested. So take some other path. Those are the two messages that you give. Where are we going, and what do we not want to see happen along the way there? And so what I hear you all struggling with are these same two messages. I hear on one hand you all are talking about goals, which uniquely describe what are the outcomes we want for our students? What do we want our students to know and be able to do? What is the vision? What is the goal of having a school system? But then I also hear you lifting up some of these other concerns, which are what are things that we don't want to lose along the way towards the goal? And those are different statements. So I wouldn't elevate the things that you don't want. I wouldn't refer to those as goals. Your goals should really be about what is it that we do want for our children. And then let's have a separate set of policies, we refer to them as constraints, to describe what are the things we don't want to see along the way. And so I think Trustee Foreman brings up a great example. Something she doesn't want to see happen is on our way to increasing family-sustaining certifications, she doesn't want to see a loss of the scaffolding level certifications. Did I understand you correctly on that?
Correct.
So she's describing two different things. Where do we go, but what do we not do on the way? Trustee Ang, what I hear you describing is what I want is I want my students to know and be able to do this set of things. Along the way, what I don't want is for us to lose our most effective principals. I don't want us to lose our most effective teachers. And so I would just encourage you to distinguish that those are two different things you're describing. One are what is our goals, which goals should intentionally describe what are the things our students know and are able to do. And if you see something that doesn't say this is what your students know or are able to do, it is not actually a goal of the organization. The goal of the organization isn't to have a balanced budget. That is a value you want to protect on your way to the goal. The goal of the organization isn't to have a really great teacher. That is a value you want to protect because it helps you get to the goal. But the goal of the organization, how do we increase student outcomes? How do we increase what it is that students actually know and are able to do when they leave our institutions? So I just want to juxtapose those two. The main conversation you're having today is a goals conversation. I think after you have your goals conversation, I think then it's necessary to come back and have a conversation about what are our constraints? What are our theory of action? The things that say what are the values that we want to protect on the way to the goal? Things that that don't describe what our students know and are able to do, but are still a important expression of our community's values.
Okay. Goals 2 and 3. Yes?
I have the notes I was going to mention. I think that's a great point. I think there's ways to articulate it as a goal that's aspirational as well. As far as 2 and 3, what I love about it is it meets. The only thing that I would ask that we consider adding is a KPI of 2.3, perhaps the percentage of kids enrolled in pre-K. The kids that we're enrolling in pre-K 3 and pre-K 4. I know this is something that's really important to the board and making sure that all students have access to high quality pre-K. And I think that is a really thing to consider as part of a KPI, part of 2 and 3.
So is that an actual student outcome, as it were?
I think you can phrase it as such, though. Yeah.
So could you go ahead?
Students entering kindergarten ready, percentage of students entering kindergarten ready. I think is a really a way to do that.
So let me bow to the administration here. Do you have a way of doing that? Kindergarten readiness?
When we get back to that. We're not there yet. Yeah.
I just, can you slow down and say what the goal, what the KPI would be?
So I think you could do it if you wanted to speak on a specific like academic achievement level outcome, then more kids into pre-K. It could be the percentage of students who enter kindergarten ready, moving from this percentage to this
Now, does
percentage.
the district actually have control over
We should through pre-K.
pre-K readiness?
I'm not saying pre-K readiness, I'm saying kindergarten readiness. We offer pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, and we've been trying to expand that. So I want to see what the kindergarten readiness is based on the work for the students we serve, coming in and seeing that rise.
2.2 and 3.2 are end of year measures. Trustee Mackey, I think I hear you talking about a beginning of year measure. That traditionally has sat on the superintendent's evaluation instrument. What I like about what you're saying is we've measured that for all kids coming into kinder, and obviously we don't impact all kids before they get to us. But there is a way to narrow that specifically for pre-K only students, but that's never been part of the board goals.
To say that it would be the specific verbiage that we would place in this goal where we would do it, it's gotta be clear that it's not, that we're not saying DISD pre-K, that it's not just narrowing it down to DISD pre-K kids, and that it's all kids that are kindergarten ready, because that's gonna elicit the carrot we need to then keep expanding pre-K so that more kids are actually doing DISD pre-K, thereby getting a better pre-K quality, thereby being kindergarten ready.
Okay. Any thoughts, Mr. Superintendent?
You think we can do that stuff?
Derek and I are talking about it. We think we can, where we would put we could actually, I mean, he's reported out on it before, where we actually look at, it's on your, it's been on your evaluation instrument. And so I'm looking for that, I think we do have some of the verbiage here, where we would take the pre-K students, it's on here somewhere, where is it? That you measure the kindergarten readiness of all students at the beginning of the year, but so that we could also disaggregate specifically the students that were in the pre-K 4 that are in pre-K, because that way we are able to see if in fact the value add for that expansion of the pre-K 4 is showing up in kinder ready, is what I think I'm hearing Trustee Mackey and Solis say.
And again, I don't want to put this out there, say we have to come up with that metric right now. I think it's just really important because again, what we name here changes the direction of the district. And if we don't name anything that will force us to change around pre-K, then we won't, I mean, I'm not saying we won't, but it's not as incentivized. So, and I would put that on administration to figure out and then come back with us with, here are some metrics we're thinking about that could incentivize that. And I'm all right with flexing on that. But I think to be able to name that we want action at the pre-K level is important. And that's my takeaway.
Okay. So it doesn't,
What it does is it allows us to continue to do what we're already doing, which is continuing to improve the quality of pre-K and going after the market share.
okay. So I assume this applies to both 2 and 3. Right, going.
One thing I think the administration could use some clarity on, because you've actually proposed two very, very different things. So yours, what I heard you describe is around how do we know that the students who we're serving in pre-K are actually kindergarten ready? What that will do is inspire your administration to really look at how do we dial up the quality and how do we dial up the depth of service for the students we're serving. What Trustee Solis is saying is actually, let's not limit it to the students that we're serving. Let's say for all the students within Dallas that we ultimately end up serving in kindergarten, what that will incentivize is the superintendent figuring out how do I influence serving more and more preschoolers. That's why I'm saying.
Or increase partnership.
But these are two different things. I think you'll want to make sure you're clear with your administration which of those resonates for the board as a whole.
I'm more aligned with that one, the expanding the breadth, and obviously this is not to say that we're throwing out quality, because that's really important, but I think I'm more aligned with expanding those access for students.
Yeah.
So, yeah, trustees, what I would caution is our ability to dramatically change pre-K 4 enrollment is very limited. and that's the students who's coming in to kinder. So our measure of readiness is only based on one cohort, even though we generally conflate pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 together in the conversation. That would impact the readiness measure quite differently. And we've almost run out of children, and we've run out of partnerships to impact the pre-K 4 number. We have great ability to impact the pre-K 3 enrollment number, but that wouldn't show up in K readiness at the same time.
What's the variance? It is, but what's the variance of, you know, what's left to be, what cannot be poached from any other system that's still going to arrive as a kindergartner in DISD?
I want to make sure I understand your caveat because that changes my answer quite a bit. When you say cannot be poached for another system, we're tossing out private school, homeschool, ineligible students.
I would assume, I mean, the kid.
Students who aren't being served?
Yes.
But the eligibility factor matters a lot.
It does. So, but still, like generally speaking, the ratio of kids that are gonna show up to DISD, that we're of the belief there is no way to be able to actually capture that element of the market. Therefore, it's going to present a weight on the achievement factor of the kids, of our total DISD kinder population at the beginning of the school year.
Me on that statement.
Let me say it to you this way. So we typically have a pre-K 4 enrollment in the 9,000s. We typically have a kinder enrollment close to 11,000. So that's 2,000 students that weren't in our program, but not all 2,000 of them could have even qualified for our program.
So what I'm asking is, that last statement, do we have a sense of what that number is? The kids that we are literally
How many?
never going to have the opportunity, and how much of a weight is that on the total academic achievement of our kindergarten entry data that we're assessing? Is it that significant that it would hold us back, or can we factor in that weight into how we describe the goals so that way it's just, we don't have to worry about that element?
It definitely moves the needle because over 1,000 of those kids in the Delta would likely not have qualified. And that's doing some quick math based on our ED. We can.
What a weight would be, just so that way we know that that's assumed and we can still do what we're talking about.
But doesn't that math imply that there's so few kids that we could move in, even if this was a goal, that this is a rounding error that we're talking about on the magnitude of the full kindergarten enrollment, right?
Enrollment based on eligible students, maybe 10%. We may be in the 90% range, and there's 10% more students we can go capture.
What's the percentage? Some part of that 10%.
Oh, it's like 20. We're in the teens to low 20s in terms of pre-K 3.
But we're talking about assessing kindergarten.
Right, you have to think about the cohort of kids as opposed to the grade level.
Well, and I don't understand why. I mean, if we wanted to set a percentage of eligible kids enrolled in pre-K 3 and pre-K 4, we talk about a percentage of participation in extracurricular activities. I don't know why we couldn't name percentage of kids available to participate in our pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 programs.
But the 4 piece is already like that. We've already done that.
So then pre-K 3.
Yeah, and it's assumed that 3 is going to turn into 4 and then it's going to turn into kindergarten, or else we'd be doing a horrible job of retention for 3-year-olds. So I still think, like, AJ's point is absolutely right, and Derek's point is the reality situation is there's only so many more kids we're going to be able to actually factor into the 4-year-old piece. But how long have we had these schools? We've had these schools for 3 years, and we're already talking about significantly changing certain goals. Like in 3 years, if we've dominated the 3-year-old market space as well, and the quality is great, then that's going to translate into great 4-year-old quality, which is going to translate into great kindergarten readiness. And then the total goal, which is...
Let me ask about the will of the group here. We could probably spend a fair amount of additional time trying to work out the nuances of this. We've got 2 related measures here that will do somewhat different things. Shall we try to bang it out now, or do you want to turn this over to like a working group to present some options if the overall intent is clear?
I don't think we should bang it out now. I think we should continue.
Okay.
And we've informed the administration.
We've heard your conversation. Let us come back with something that we think might work quickly.
Thanks.
Okay, does that work for the board? Okay, so we've added this overall concept to goals 2 and 3. Goals okay, measures okay for 2 and 3. Can we dispose of those as part of your portfolio of goals? Okay. 2 and 3 done. Shall we go to goal 3?
4.
Or 4, I'm sorry. Yes, Carla.
I do have a couple of clarifying questions. Taking a look at goal progress measure 4.4, the percent of seniors completing a FAFSA. So are we saying that of those seniors that are eligible to complete a FAFSA, 77% of them will have a FAFSA complete?
Yes.
Of those eligible for?
I thought you were saying everybody. That's why it's not 100.
Yeah, I think it's the first that you're wanting is it's the students that are eligible would be completing it, then the others would be counted, but would be sitting here, for example, the TASFA, right? I think that's what you're getting at. For the students that aren't able to, are we factoring that in? I think we're saying 77% of the total, and then we're assuming there's probably about 30% thereabouts that aren't able to.
So said another way, the denominator of the fraction for 77% is all students.
Right.
Okay.
So then how are we meaningfully including TASFA students in this count?
So we keep track of our TAPSA students, but just the discussions that we've had in doing this work, it's difficult to number who they are. We know currently last year we had about 6% of our seniors complete TAPSA.
And those are only 6% of those who completed a task, but that doesn't mean that.
But we do track through our CMR tool, like if we have a FAFSA or a TAPSA on file for students. And it's also built in the fact that with the legislation, parents have the option to opt out. That we will work to market, so, and we've also developed strategies that we actually are going where parents are. Like this year, we created fans with FAFSA, so we went, instead of just talking to students at the high school, going out to the football games on Friday night, passing out fans to parents in the stand. So, and with the QR code for FAFSA, we also are working with counseling services, and we're developing pretty comprehensive plans for FAFSA completion, but that number took in account that we roughly have about a group of students that if we were looking at, and our point was what database are we capturing, and this was U.S. Department of Education's database that we were using so that we would keep count. But definitely our district internal records, we keep track of every student who are seniors and what they've completed.
I would, just for the sake of including all students in financial aid, for our TASFA students being one of the most vulnerable pieces in ensuring not only their enrollment but their completion, is that we move towards including a very specific TASFA number to financial aid completion. I don't know if you have a ballpark estimate of the number of students that would be TASFA eligible in any given year of senior cohorts. Do you have any?
About 20%.
Okay.
About 20%.
About 20% TASFA eligible.
And we could use the CCMR tool to do that, but what we were charged with was what was a verifiable source that wasn't self-reported for this document.
That's exactly right. Yeah, taking a look too at the measures at the end of the document here about the FAFSA counts pulling from the U.S. Department of Education. Just know that oftentimes I hear from counselors and advisors that those numbers reported by the Department of Ed don't accurately reflect what's the counts that they have on their campus.
So we went through that last year, and actually what we found is the U.S. Department of Ed database is a lot more reliable than the Apply Texas database, because if a student gets stuck in verification, it will show that they've completed the FAFSA application through Apply Texas. However, the difficulty is if that student gets caught in verification, it doesn't show up in the Department of Ed database. So the Department of Ed database actually tells us these are students who made it through to have clearance to receive their awards, versus the Apply Texas suite, which is just that I've attempted FAFSA.
Okay, and we're saying that would be at 77% by 2024.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that works?
That does, but again, we'll just push for the inclusivity of TASFA students being specifically called out in goals around financial aid completion, not just FAFSA.
All right, if you were going to include something on middle schools, it seems to me that goal 4 might be the place to do it.
I agree.
No, it seems to me like if you were going to include some kind of indicator on middle schools, it might go under Goal 4. Edmund?
So I have a question. So there must be a way, and I know that we hear about this all the time, that there are kids that are in 8th grade and they're really not ready for 9th grade, and there's the possibility you can hold them back, but we never hold them back. I mean, is there some
And the
metric
research
around?
is not, doesn't show that it's very effective either.
Right.
So-
Well, regardless of whatever that is, but I'm saying that there must be some measure of 8th grade
there is.
readiness that we could.
Let me ask a question to Stephanie regarding to that. You know, a lot of times people talk about gatekeeper courses, and kids who take Algebra 1
Right.
in 8th grade, those kids usually will fly through high school because now they've proven they're ready. Do we know what percentage of our kids take Algebra 1 at 8th grade, and could we start with that? And that be a leading indicator, and then we put some aggressive targets towards increasing that, or do you have a different idea, Steph?
No, well, I have two ideas, but to answer that one first, and I know Oswaldo's here, he can correct me if I've got the number incorrect, but this year in particular, school leadership with teaching and learning specifically targeted that we have been under-identifying students that are ready for Algebra 1, starting all the way back from 5th grade. We have 5th grade students that were ready to go into a pre-AP math course, thereby putting you on target to take the 8th grade Algebra 1. And this was an opt-in. So what Oswaldo's team, teaching and learning and school leadership has done is now it's not an opt-in, it's an opt-out. If you score this on STAR, you're at meets, you should be in a pre-AP course. So we were making parents or guardians have to say, raise my hand, I put my child in there, which again, if you're not a parent of agency, how do I know that that's something I need to do? So that increased the number, because we have somewhere now about what percentage of 5th graders, start with my 5th grade, is it like 40, 38%?
It's closer to 60%.
So, because that's the one that went up dramatically.
Right.
So nearly 60% of the 5th graders going to 6th grade are at meets. So we now are putting that percentage of students on target to take the Gatekeeper Algebra 1 course at 8th grade. But in between there, for current 6th, 7th graders, Oswaldo again and his team got very creative and did Summer Bridge. We got permission from the agency to ensure specific standards were mastered and therefore allowed the student to, if you will, get credit for like 7th grade and take 8th grade. So number one, we do have more students and we could use that, trustees, as a way of indicating that we're accelerating the performance of middle school, getting them ready, to Trustee Flores' point, for 9th grade. Because if you are Algebra 1 complete in 8th grade, we know those students do well with rare exception. Number two, though, at 8th grade, like in 5th grade, in order, if you have not met them, that's a grade performance a test requirement to move to 9th grade in STAR reading and math. And it is a law requirement that if they are going to be moved to the 9th grade and haven't passed both math and reading STAR at 8th grade, then we have to hold grade placement committees. And so, and as a matter of fact, one of the trustees, Trustee Foreman, asked for information regarding this, because every year I get concerns from high school principals about how many students do not seem to be ready that seem to be at 9th grade. I also want to be very transparent, though, that the opposite of that. So yes, we could track how many kids are being placed by the grade placement committee versus having passed the STAR assessment. The reverse of that, though, is I do want to caution us, and I'm sure that Mr. Crable would concur with this statement. The opposite, though, of just retain the kids also isn't a solution, right? So there's no easy answer to this, but to the point of us making sure that they're ready so that they're not having to be retained. Do we retain 8th grade students? We do retain 8th grade students. There are, it is a large grade level where there is retention. We don't see those students, opposite of what people think. They don't go, I'm failed, I'm going to work really hard this 8th grade year this time so that I can make it to the 9th grade. Like, that just generally doesn't happen. So neither promotion without being ready nor the retention because they're not ready seem to be a good practice. So to your all's point, getting them prepared is the way to do that. But we could track that through GPCs.
So one other thing, when the council collects its annual academic KPIs, we do 7th, 8th, and 9th grade Algebra 1 successful completion rates, to Stephanie's point. So you've got all 3 grades. Plus we do course passage rates in 9th grade and course failure rates. So they're a little bit of the same thing. The course passage and failure rates includes more than just Algebra 1. It includes just the main core courses. So I think you're reporting on those too.
We do, and
So,
we do have the dashboard that actually tracks how many kids have failed courses by grade level, that we could also say in each grade level.
yeah.
And I'm on the executive committee with the Council of Great City Schools, so I know this fact. But this to Trustee Solis' point earlier, as we start inching towards that premier urban district, the council used to just keep operational KPIs, but now they've shifted and have academic KPIs, which we're very much involved in. So we have a lot of this data that Cecilia, that Dr. Oakley, Dr. Lear, and Stephanie Lizaldi all have a committee, and also Dr. Durant, and we study those academic KPIs, and we see where we're moving the needle. So that can come at a future conversation, but I just wanted to let you know there are some data sets available through the council that we can start monitoring that. But let's go back to the middle school.
Yeah, Joyce?
So this has been one of my real issues that I've talked about a lot, and Stephanie, you know, I've been asking a lot of questions about middle school and what's happening with our middle school children. And through the grade placement committee, many kids do get on to the 9th grade. And you have a lot of principals in high school that are struggling with students who are not ready because they go through the grade placement committee, they're moved on to the 9th grade, and they're not ready. So I'll say it again, if you're not measuring it, you're not gonna pay attention to it. And so I just believe that this is a particular issue that we need to pay closer attention to. And if there's an opportunity to measure it, then we should be measuring it so that we get better at it. This is not from a negative standpoint, it's to make us better and to move these children into the 9th grade that are ready. We have a lot of struggling young children. Middle school kids are just, it's difficult anyway. But
So a number of you have mentioned middle school and what a priority it is, and that it's a bit of a weak spot in the district. We've got a couple of suggestions here for maybe building this in as one of the indicators, successful completion of Algebra 1, you name the grades, or successful passing rates in 9th grade. That one would force the administration to pay attention to prep in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And it's a broader area than just 9th grade algebra.
yeah, I don't think it's just Algebra 1, and you keep saying that, but I think it's bigger than Algebra 1.
Well, that's why I raised the last, it's broader course successful passage rates.
Look at what they're doing on the STAR test. Whatever they're measured on the STAR test, we need to be looking at that.
Yeah.
We need to, it's bigger than Algebra.
So we do have an indicator on passage rates of the 4 core courses. English, Algebra 1 in the 9th grade. It's either history or civics and one other. And what the course passage rate is for all 9th graders, could be 8th graders too, for that matter.
We also have the 9th grade on track, although that's.
Yeah,
that goes into
that's
high
another
school,
good one too.
Could I interject in here? Because I would like to suggest a consideration that this actually be in Domain 1, and that we would then look at the 8th grade we would call out, similar to how we've called out African American student performance, that we would specifically call out 8th grade Domain 1 performance as part of that, so that would go to your point, trustee Foreman, of it's not just Algebra 1, it's how did they do in the 2 assessments. I mean, it would probably require 2 GPMs, one for math 8th grade and one for reading 8th grade. But I think we could capture then students that are actually meeting that standard, specifically calling it out.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong here. It's kind of what the.
Let me offer this up, because another thing that Stephanie, because she got tired of me talking about middle schools is the last frontier and one of her partners. But we started this new initiative, Achievement in the Middle, and it's a newly funded program where we're focusing on middle schools. But let's take this conversation also and talk about what GPMs can we put where that will bring a bright light to middle school performance and bring it back in the next iteration of this, whether it's in domain 1, which is goal 1, or whether it's in goal 4. Just challenge us to bring back some other goal progress measures that takes into consideration the whole middle school experience.
Okay. The important thing is that we've agreed in concept to have a measure that assesses the success of middle school age children, at least on their core courses. Because we want to make it broader, to Joyce's point, than just Algebra 9.
Go ahead, Ben.
Does that,
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
So I don't want to throw a bomb in everything that just happened, but I'm going to, because I kind of want, I want us to grasp what Joyce has just said and understand that if we have seen these goals as a catalyst for actual substantive change on the issues that we've put the highlight of it on, like getting kids to do, extracurricular activities, I would make the argument that there is merit to the and I wouldn't even call it middle school, I would call it middle grades, because we're still trying to determine, the nation is trying to determine whether middle schools are actually relevant anymore, and if they can move the needle for kids. So I'd say at middle grades, it having literally its own goal. And the reason why I would go that far is because there is enough research now to show definitive correlates between middle school performance in certain things and post-secondary readiness. Going so far as to, look at academic attendance and its correlation at that grade level, or things like revolutionary things like grit scales. We talk about the social emotional learning stuff. Like, there are literal scales now that we can apply, and if we measure other elements like that tend to have a stronger correlation to post-secondary readiness, then it might be helpful in us actually redefining what we do in middle grade. So if we were to create...
To our earlier point, in terms of having too many goals, is there one that you would replace?
The extracurricular activity stuff. I mean, we don't have to sacrifice us doing what we've already done, but we've changed the culture so much, we're doing it. So my suggestion would be, at least for Dr. Oakley, Stephanie, and Pam, it would be, take a look at the research today that shows the pretty significant correlation between a certain set of things that we know have predictive value for middle schoolers and post-secondary readiness, and are there ways to literally create find out whatever the assessment is, or the percentage is on whatever assessment it is you want to build the goal around, but there are actually key progress measures that you can build underneath that, tied to some of these other indicators that we actually already are studying right now, and I think we could move.
Let us come back with 2 versions. One, where we come up with a different goal for middle years. I think he makes a great point, because even in our own, we have K-8s, we have 4-8s, we have 6-8s, we have 7-8s, we have all kinds of middle arrangements. So let us come back with a separate goal. And then at some point, the board's gonna decide, okay, we drop goal 5 and add this one, or we embed this in other goals. But let us work on coming up with one for the board to consider at a future
You
date.
could also take the extracurricular under goal 5 and turn it into an indicator under goal 4.
And real quick, I think another way to do it to consider, I mean, creating a combined metric of the things that are most correlative, algebra and enrollment, STAR reading and math, MAP readiness, and if they're involved in extracurricular, you can create a metric that is, this is what we define as success in 8th grade, and that can be inserted under CCMR, I think, comfortably if we had that right metric, or it can be its own goal. I think that's a different conversation. I do have some just general thoughts on the sub-indicators there. First of all, Brian, do you happen to know, out of the 57% of college enrollment that we're currently at, based on what it said, what percentage of those 57% filled out TAFSA or FAFSA, roughly? All? So then, I do agree with Carla's point about TAFSA, but if we have a college enrollment goal, I don't think we also need a TAFSA and FAFSA goal, because if we're increasing that, first of all, TAFSA and FAFSA doesn't matter if they're not going to college, and if they're going to college, they're filling out TAFSA and FAFSA. So I would consider combining those into a college goal, if all of those kids that go to college are filling out TAFSA and FAFSA. And then also, to name it as a specific sub-indicator goal? Is it? I don't, is to name it as a KPI of a board goal?
FAFSA, you're expected to have a metric for it, yes.
Okay, all right, that's fair. And then perhaps there's also, if we do fit the middle school goal in here, to combine the industry, the certs into a goal, because I don't think we want to go over 5 KPIs in that case. So combining the certs somehow, if we do fit middle school in here. But those are my thoughts on that.
Just a reminder for consideration as you all think about that goal 5, because I heard you all kind of throw around, maybe that one would be either eliminated or embedded. Keep in mind that we do measure, even the new format is a requirement under the local accountability system. So it is being measured in every principal's evaluation. So just so that you know you're not sacrificing, that it's actually being measured and we could report out on it and wouldn't necessarily have to be a goal.
Yeah, the district, the administration is going to have tons more data than the board can ever possibly consider, cogently. It's going to keep things like this and many hundreds of other things at the same time, and they'll use that kind of data to make tactical and programmatic decisions to help move the needle on these other goals. Stuff that you may not ever even know about. So there's agreement that we will build in either a goal or an indicator on middle grade course performance, and the administration will bring back a couple of options, either as a goal or as an embedded indicator. Okay. Anything else on goal 4, Carla?
Yeah, really quick question of clarification on 4.5. So historically, what's been the percentage of this going into a 57 currently in college enrollment? What's the percentage going into 2-year and those going into 4-year?
I can get it to you from our clearinghouse report.
Okay.
Okay, are we done with goal 4, other than what the administration is going to bring back? Okay. Goal 1. So this is the kind of all-purpose academic goals on the state assessments and measured by domain 1, what the proficiency level.
This is where I think the best spot is to put a no IR and no D school goal as a GPM. So, if there's some other place that it fits better, just speak up, Stephanie. But I'd love to see that enumerated on this document.
Yeah, I do think it would go, I think it's related to goal 1 because the whole intent of improving your performance in domain 1 is so that we can get that all the way down to the campus level, teacher level, student level. You would have 0 Fs, ultimately 0 Ds.
The only challenge I would offer to that is you talk about this being a progress measure for one of your goals. It won't actually help you measure progress.
End product.
Why is that?
Because by the time you know whether you won or lost the game, you can't impact the game. You can't impact the score after you know who won.
Oh, you're saying you're challenging the progress part of it, not that it's not correlated. You're just saying
It's almost as if.
post facto is the issue.
It's almost as if we were going to do this, this would need to be
its
a
own
goal, and then I would need to create goal progress measures using like ACPs at the campus level where we would report out, this is how many schools after the first common assessment I have concerns about. Is this getting me closer to being able to present that we're gonna get to 0 Fs?
Okay,
So
sounds good. Let's do
that's
that.
what I heard AJ, correct?
Well,
Randy, I was thinking that, but I was.
Yeah, I think the truth of the matter is that if you're doing these with the middle school, your numbers of low-performing schools are likely to go down anyway.
Or elementary.
Pardon? So if you're meeting or making progress on these other goals, the number of kids who are in low-performing schools is likely to go down.
They're elementary.
We have mostly elementary. We have 8, of which
Seven.
7
With
Seven.
6
are elementary.
6 are elementary, 1 is a middle school. But I think the challenge for us is in fact the unit of analysis, which is why that is also a requirement by the agency. It's not just overall students, but at their individual campuses. And so you could, as in fact we have improved in domain 1 significantly, and yet we added more
Yeah.
F schools this year.
Exactly, that was gonna be my answer, is that what just happened last year empirically denies that that's not true. I mean, empirically proves that's not true. So Stephanie, I'm all on board with it being its own goal. I'm curious what your thoughts on both the KPIs are, as well as where you think we would be in year 5. So I'm giving you an opportunity to give a different answer than what you told me on the phone the other day, because I thought yours was
Not giving you a
good
different
for you,
answer.
because I thought it was very ambitious.
So I want you to convince your colleagues.
Well,
that
hold on,
it's-
I want to hear her
okay.
answer first before.
So we recognize that it is about identifying at the campus level where the supports are needed.
Yeah.
And as we presented to you, a month ago in our Perfect Vision 2020 of 0 F schools, is in fact, we now are looking at all those characteristics or traits of what percentage of proficient 1 teachers do we have at campuses, year of experience of the principal, and then now we get to monitor common assessments leading up to the ACPs prior to that December. So for instance, right now I have an internal dashboard that lists, these are the 17 schools right now that I'm like, what's going on? So that we now come in, we're not waiting till December.
This
So
is
I
the
think-
slide 12 in
Yes.
the one I would love so
Yes.
much. Yeah.
Yes.
I would love it if that were a goal, and frankly, I think there's no more impactful thing we could do as a district, especially if you're talking about moving to the world where there's no C schools.
Yeah.
Not only no Fs and no Ds, but no Cs. I mean, if you put on paper that by 2023, 2024, your objective is to have no C, D, or F schools, there's no more impactful thing we could do as a district that's on this whole page than that.
Okay, and which goal would be eliminated?
I mean, I'm not bought into the idea that we only need to have 5 goals, but if I had to pick one to eliminate, I would probably get rid of the extracurricular one.
Okay, now this is
I
assuming
also
that.
could debate that the third one could go away, although I think that's part of HB3 too.
All right, can you convince your colleagues?
I don't know who needs to be convinced.
Yeah, so it can't be just his idea, otherwise it's his goal and not the board's goal. So the question is whether or not the board is in agreement that this should be a goal, or it should be embedded into something else.
I could be persuaded. I would also say that the goal that I suggested on actually creating a middle school goal, if there were a way to take Ben's concept of literally creating our own middle grades, achievement value that we could embed within a GPM of maybe goal 1 or maybe goal 1, where it literally took the highest correlatives and figured out a way to combine them to spit out one output, one value that we would use to judge all middle school performance. I would be open to getting off the soapbox of the middle school goal itself. but those values, those inputs that spit out that one value, like an ERA, that would have to, those things that we're measuring would have to be the highest correlation towards post-secondary success. So if you can do that for me, now I'm
Then you're on board with me.
Now I'm getting to do it. But I would love to be able to see what those values, those inputs are.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, of course.
It sounds like I'm doing a lot of work after this, so I'm trying to make sure I understand what, okay, so if, for instance, within, if I'm hearing correctly, I'm trying to capture both the idea of how many F schools, D schools, C schools, and our progress towards arriving at all A's and B's, and the middle school urgency of ensuring that we're measuring and improving that middle grades, as opposed to a middle school, that within a goal, if there was a goal progress measure that captured, for instance, the middle school, then we wouldn't have to have the middle grades as a separate goal, but have that as a GPM under goal 1.
Yeah.
And that, so eliminating, I'm just trying to talk out loud, if goal 5 did go away.
Good job talking out loud.
Thinking out loud, excuse me, thank you for catching that, sir. So, goal 5 would be replaced by the number, a goal that would be about the number of schools that are F's, D's, C's, etc. And goal progress measures under those could include African American student performance, middle school, middle grade performance, all of these indicators that we know these are students that we're ensuring we want to close our achievement gap, narrow that achievement gap. So keeping those big goals, but then honing in on all the concerns I've heard through the GPMs that we call those.
I thought you were talking about a different set of GPMs under the FDC goal.
I was, but I said in addition to just looking at the schools, that we would also then even, where it was appropriate, we would make sure, so middle schools or middle grades, any campus with middle grades, ensuring that the number of, we specifically call out based on the dashboard that we get from Common Assessments or ACPs, that in fact we don't have any middle schools that are looking like they're gonna become Fs or Ds, so that there's consistency of specifically targeting those schools. Although that goal would have to include every single campus, period.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're already saying you're not gonna have any D schools, then that implies that you don't have any middle D schools. Right?
Correct.
So
I'd have to
I don't
play
know
around
that-
with it.
Yeah, I don't know that you need that extra step in there.
Okay, no matter which way you go on this, it looks like goal 5 is out unless you take one of the GPMs and embed it in one of the GPMs.
Is it because of the Lone Star governance model that we are insisting on only having 5 goals?
No, it's just good good research in management practices.
Yeah, and I agree.
And
I
which
agree
is
5
where
ideal,
which is
but-
where Lone Star got it, was good management
Sure.
research.
And I agree 5 would be ideal, but I mean, it could be a collective decision of the board that we want to violate that principle and have 6, right?
Sure, you can have 10 or 15, but the more that you have, the harder it is for the administration to focus.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just saying we shouldn't assert that that is a fixed,
But I would have been uncomfortable about goal 5 going away, except it is part of our school performance framework. It is part of the principal's evaluation. It's part of something that's made our district magic in a few things. It's not going away. We've got other protections, and now since we've made that much progress, now we got other things that are a priority. Those things will continue to work well. So I'm comfortable now. We've had this discussion.
Again, another way you could do it is just turn it into a GPM under goal 4, which is a post-secondary kind of thing, and use this GPM to essentially assess engagement of secondary school students, which will add to their likelihood of graduating from college.
So I hear the extracurricular moving out, and I'm hearing an idea of this A, B, C, D, F getting incorporated in. I have a few questions. If we're meeting our goals, I mean, how does that relate to F and D schools? And if you're hitting these out of the park, how does that relate to our F and D schools?
Because it matters not just that students are improving, in a majority of our schools. They have to improve in every single school, because otherwise we're in the same situation we're in now.
If you hit these goals, when you set these goals, did you envision having DNF schools, or did you envision that these
Absolutely,
goals?
I did not think, I thought that if we improved,
If
and we
you
had
improve
four.
like this, you would no longer have DNF schools.
I thought we would not have, I absolutely thought we would not have any
Yeah, so I
F
trust your
schools.
leadership.
And so that is why even though, certainly I'm the one that would feel that pressure, second
Yeah.
only to our superintendent. But, the idea is, when we studied it, some schools just did extremely well.
So I feel a bit of redundancy if you actually make that a separate goal, because I felt what you just gave me, that you plan these goals with the idea of removing DNF schools. I've also heard a superintendent say on multiple occasions he wants to be an A district, which we all want to be, which requires us not to have any DNF schools. So I like the goal, but I feel like it's embedded, one, in what you've already planned for us, but two, in just how you two operate, and the idea that you don't want DNF schools. So for the board to then, feels like we're being redundant a bit in my sense. And then I also have, some skepticism on just the consistency of, I don't know, maybe AJ can answer this, how
Follow your instincts.
a lot of these goals here, we're focusing on our kids here in our city. This A through F comes from the state. And legislative sessions meet every other year, and you just don't know. You really can't predict, but we can predict what we're going to do with our kids. And even the standardized tests we get from the state, but still, we can predict what we can do with our kids. I feel like you all can. So setting our goal based on we even opted out of that. We have local accountability. We didn't choose to take their full, so we've already taken that step where we feel like we want to deal more locally when we set goals for ourselves and not kind of focus on necessarily what the state's doing. So I hear it. I do have some concerns about it. So I'm not one of those folks that thinks we should put that in as 5. I do like going back to again what Trustee Mackey talked about earlier. And I know you said it's a constraint, and I don't know even how to manage that, but that idea of the principal, teacher stability, culture, whatever that ends up looking like.
In addition to your comment, it may be part of the incentive plan. And so it's already gonna carry a lot of weight that way.
Yeah, Edwin?
So, kind of going back to something that AJ said earlier about the constraints. I mean, to me, it seems like not having any D or F schools is a constraint. It's like you just shouldn't have them, right? I mean, it's the same thing with don't be bad to your teachers and principals. That to me is like a
Or
constraint.
George's, don't lose the number of small C certified.
Right, exactly. I mean, these are things we don't want you to do
Right.
versus.
For a constraint, wouldn't that imply that we were there right now?
No, it's
No.
just saying, you shouldn't have more than 30% principal turnover, right? I mean, it's just something. If it's less than
Yeah,
30%,
meet
you
these
probably do
goals,
better.
but
It's
on
not a
the way to
goal.
those goals,
It's not
don't
something that
let
you're
this
working
happen.
your way toward. It's saying you just shouldn't have these. It's a constraint.
What are you missing?
I don't understand how that could be viewed as not a goal. We're not there right now.
It's just, it's just saying what it is you don't want to see happen. So it's a goal in reverse.
Go ahead, man.
So my thoughts on that is I want to echo, I am not really compelled by how this one is written for a couple reasons, and I'm less compelled by A through F for the same reasons. So number one, this is it's local. Number one, all state assessments, domain 1, increasing from 46 to 58. Number one, not all kids in our system take STAR, and that's the only thing that domain 1's on. So automatically we're saying these kids don't matter for this. So that's why I'm uncompelled with that. For A through F, it's even less so because I bet a lot of our schools hit progress measure to get their grade rather than domain 1. And that's even less students that we're talking about that would incentivize getting A through F. I think if we hit academic achievement and growth goals with our kids, the state rankings and all of that will follow along. And so I do want to go back to, I think one thing that was proposed, I think Miguel, you mentioned it, was around this national thing. If we're going to MAP, I think if we had something, for instance, if this was MAP, we're doing MAP 2 through 9 that we're talking about. If we believe in that assessment, it is nationally normed. It is something that every single one of our kids would take, and we could see growth from every single one of our kids on that in a way that's not, there's, people have concerns about STAR, et cetera, but at the end of the day, STAR is not nationally normed, whereas MAP is. that is a way to really think high level. We can align it all there. It's a national goal. And I really do believe if we show growth with all of our kids at MAP, it's correlated to STAR, it's correlated to ACT. That would lead to the same outcomes of what's happening in A through F. Because again, A through F is only like in elementary school, the progress measure is only certain kids on certain tests based on what they did last year for the progress.
Yeah, this is, I'm going to have to wade in on this one. I don't have any problem in the use of MAP. It does produce a growth measure in the way that nothing else does. They are nationally normed, but their national norm is on their customer base. It's not a true national norm, although the customer base is pretty large. So I don't know that it's significantly different, but it's not a true national norm. Pardon? Pardon?
How many members of this?
I would guess over half.
Right.
Yeah,
But let me also ask the question while you're going down this path about regression. A lot of times people want to compare us to Miami-Dade County. Well, Miami-Dade County includes the entire county. Key Biscayne is in Miami-Dade County. That's like if we had Highland Park, if we had Garland, if we had Rowlett, if we had Saxe, Coppell, and DeSoto, it'd be a different context. But if you just go compare it to somebody and you don't take into consideration, there's really 5 city districts. The 5 largest city districts are New York, LA, Chicago, Houston, and us. Rest, in Las Vegas, it's 67% of the state is in Clark County School District. And so we would be comparing to 67% of Clark County. And now, or 100% of Hawaii, because Hawaii is one district. So, I mean, when you start doing those national norms, now you're comparing apples to grapes, to green apples, to purple.
Yeah, I think that is more compelling because we were talking about every single student in our system in those grade ranges rather than just the kids who hit the progress measure based on the STAR they took last year, which is what the A through F is really correlated on. And then I think to the other point around like this idea of incentivizing and making sure that our excellent teachers, principals, and counselors stay on campuses that need them, I think that is very viable to phrase as a goal, that our goal is that we see this type of retention at the same campuses and principals or teachers that are meeting this, and that on TEI or PEI, because otherwise you have like what happens when we saw round 1 of ACE stipends come off, there's massive turnover, and then we're trying to scramble and figure that out. I think that's a meaningful thing if we were to set a goal of that, because I don't believe, it's a constraint that we're currently violating, and maybe it's something that we can talk about, but I think that's
You're really going to
critical
end up
point.
with way too many goals here.
Oh,
What is it that you want, if you had a focus on teacher retention, what is it that a higher degree of retained teachers would produce for you vis-a-vis the kids? So if you retain more teachers, what's the benefit for the kids? What's the outcome? Pardon?
He's making the point that teacher retention is an input, not an output.
Yeah, it is. It's a programmed strategy. It's an input. It's one of the things that the administration pursues to get you the results and the goals that you want.
Well, then perhaps I would phrase that as, so in my mind around not adding goals, like to me, the 5 goals, if I were just to choose them based on this conversation right now, would be MAP, NAEP, nationally norm measure, the 2, 3, and 4 that we talked about, and the last one would be sustained high performance and of campuses that have been low before, or tier 1, however we define it, over a period of time, and one of the GPMs would be retainment of TEI, PEI principles on that.
You just accidentally agreed with me, though.
No, not in the A through F.
Oh, you want to define, how do you want to define underperforming then? Like which campus, how do you know which campuses are underperforming?
I think if we can do it based on MAP, I think we could do it based on STAR. I'd rather do it based on STAR than A through F anyways. So I think one of those.
I want to add on the map, the norming, the national norming for Spanish this is our first year, so we're still under local norms. Local norms probably meaning state or something.
Yeah.
So we
So
need another
I-
year, a couple years.
Yeah, I'd also, if you're going to use MAP, I'd also urge you to make sure that you recalibrate their goal, their growth measures to correspond to the goals that you want, because they use a uniform set of growth measures that may or may not be tagged to the targets you're setting.
And I think that's why Derek's baseline, and I don't want to speak for you, why don't you?
Yeah, to clarify on how MAP is playing out in GPM 2.1 and 3.1, it does reflect that the growth measures are going to have to be much more aggressive than what MAP would set as typical for us to hit these targets. The other thing is this is based on the meets equivalent from third grade STAR. So this number is not actually against their national norm, it's against what you need to achieve to be at least at meets on third grade STAR.
And I just want to clarify though, domain 1 is all students that are taking STAR. It's 2A and 2B that show the progress measure that require the previous. So I just want to be, that's why we chose domain 1 as opposed to your point, Trustee Mackey, because otherwise then we're not including all of the students that are eligible for STAR. And so that's specifically why we called out domain 1 in goal 1.
Okay.
That was my point. I like domain 1 better than A through F, because if you look at A through F, you're focusing on domain 2 as much as you are domain 1 there.
Well, not necessarily, because remember the state gives us the highest
Right. So,
of.
but now you're going from domain 1, you're only looking at domain 1. When you go to A through F, now you can look at domain 1 or 2, and so it makes progress just as valuable as domain 1 in that sense.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's why I like domain 1 better than A through F.
Because
And
you
I like
don't
some.
want to include progress? I'm not following you. Because you don't want to include progress as a?
No, I think progress is important. I want the number of kids that impact that metric to be as many as possible. If we're talking about kids achieving, then if you're looking at, when you have a choice of
I see, 'cause
achievement or progress, theoretically, if I'm a school and that was my goal, I can focus
kind of
just
have
on making
both.
progress
Well,
with the
that's
kids
why
that are
I was
eligible
saying
for
we would
progress
have.
and achieve that goal. Ignore the other kids that aren't eligible for progress.
Gotcha.
If I look at domain 1, I have to look at all kids taking STAR. If I look at something like MAP, I can be forced to look at all kids.
Yeah.
And I
But
just
to be
thought
clear, I
that we were.
wasn't suggesting the IR thing and it replaced domain 1.
No, and
was-
I wasn't either. I was actually thinking we were back to adding.
Yeah.
Or either as a goal, the A through F, or putting it as a constraint that we would have to work towards because we already have some. Still saying we wanted to work to 0 Fs in this year. We will have 0 Fs, et cetera.
Yeah, and I'm still majorly struggling with this idea that it's a constraint and not a goal. I mean, to me, it is aspirational, right? It's something that you're trying to get towards. I mean, it's.
So Ben, did you want to put your teacher retention as a goal on the table, or
I'd like to hear what people think about it.
do you want to try to convince your colleagues that it ought to be a goal?
So I think the reason that it could be a goal is because we know it is an input, because it is an input in some sense, that highly correlates with student academic achievement. Just like extracurriculars. So extracurricular is not an academic achievement goal. It is an input that correlates with higher academic achievement. And so in the same vein, to look at our campuses that turn over principals or teachers that feel like they need to move on or move out or move something else, if we look at what those correlative factors are and make sure that where we've got a school rocking and rolling that has historically been really low performing and they have blown it out, then we want to incentivize those teachers and those principals to stay there and continue to do that work and feel empowered doing it. So we don't see that churn. I think that's a place, if we've got a concentration of teachers that have been recognized as excellent in this district, so that they don't feel like they have to move to somewhere else to either get an ACE stipend or just because other things are happening. Their tier 1 points disappear because the school is no longer performing. Those type of things, we want to incentivize that stability and structure there because we know that that's a highly correlative input with academic achievement, just like our extracurricular goal.
So now, the one thing you haven't said is what happens if we put a teacher retention goal in place, but we're retaining the wrong teachers?
Well, I think it's very important that it is excellent teachers and principals and
Is
counselors.
that part of the goal too?
Yeah, I think that needs to be part of the define.
All right, anybody like to argue the other side of this?
I'd like to argue along with him.
That's called agreeing, not arguing.
So, Stephanie, we've had a conversation about our low performing schools. So, there were two common factors.
What's that?
One of them was new principals
No.
and the caliber of teachers, if I heard that correctly. It was principals and,
I would say it differently, but yes, percentage of proficient one or higher teachers.
so just to Ben's point is that, I keep hearing this about retaining poor teachers, and we keep throwing that around cavalierly like that's what we're doing. But I don't believe that's what we're doing. And I know for a fact that, the change in schools in my area have been based on consistency in principals and, the teachers. Retaining some of the teachers. The teachers know the children, they work better that way. And one of the things we're not doing is we're not measuring that. We have a system in place that is a forced distribution system that forces out 300 teachers every year anyway. Those are supposed to be your bad teachers. That's what I've always been told. Forced distribution forces out your bad teachers. But we keep throwing around that do we want to keep bad teachers? I don't think anybody wants to keep bad teachers, but I think that there has to be some measurement in terms of who we're keeping, because we have a lot of competition. And particularly in my area, which is right on the southern tip, the suburban schools are poaching teachers every day. And I think everybody knows that. That's not new news. So we've got to figure out a better way other than just saying, oh, well, we got a system and we're going to just get rid of teachers and we don't care if they're the bad teachers or the good teachers, because we're forcing out good teachers also. So there has to be some way that we can measure that. I don't know the answer. I do not know the answer. But I do know that we've got to stop talking about our system as this premier system that's keeping all the good teachers. If you look at where the master teachers are and the master principals, they're not in my district. They're in your choice schools. So we've got to figure out a better master. I don't know the answer, but I agree with Ben that there's got to be some way that we can figure out how we measure that and how we make sure that we're retaining. I know Dr. Wilson, last year we did some things to try to increase the number of teachers that were at Proficient 2.
Yes, at Proficient 2.
Yeah, we have a larger number of teachers now at Proficient 2.
It's a larger band.
Yes, it's a larger number. I think that is good. I don't think that's the total answer. And so trying to figure out how we manage to keep the good teachers, you're not going to do what we don't measure. If we don't measure it, it's probably not going to be done. My opinion.
Yes, Carla.
Yeah, and just to add on to, I think, Trustee Henry's point about these goals were set with the intention that we wouldn't have D or F schools. I think this goal fits perfectly into the narrative of keeping and retaining excellent teachers will mean that we won't fall into having those campus performances. And I just left a larger discussion around the teaching profession, but I'm just speaking more anecdotally here, but the teaching profession for the majority of students falls dead last when it comes to student interest in post-secondary pathways. I think having an explicit goal from the district saying in DISD we want to pay teachers well and keep them in our district sends a message about the teaching profession and the call for giving our educators that prestige that they need in executing this profession. So just turning it there, and I know, Stephanie, you presented to us, Chief Elizalde, on how we identified the interventions around turning the DNF schools, and we looked at precisely the metrics around first-year teachers, their ratings and such, but I think all those explicitly combined into a goal around teachers and principals in the district could fall into those, and where they're distributed, would fall into the collective goal of keeping and retaining and paying, so that DISD essentially becomes not just a premier place for students, but a premier place to work. So I think that's how every major city and school district wants to tell itself.
Okay, this is a good example of an adult outcome. This is not a student outcome.
And I was gonna make that point. If you really gonna force us to have an input as an outcome, then don't be surprised at what you get, because then you're gonna have unintended consequences. That's my only caution.
I agree completely with that statement. I think we're going down the wrong path here of trying to codify inputs just because they're tightly correlated to the outcomes, and that, you know, the correlation of the input to the outcome is relevant for the administration when making decisions about how to reach the outcome, but it isn't what you should actually be tracking. It's
not an outcome itself.
Yeah, it's a tool to reach the outcome.
It is, and it's exactly in that case study that we did when question 0 got raised. You've now got a question 0 and a question 1 because you've added an adult. Outcome. So is the goal of the system to improve kids? One of the strategies is to make sure they got good teachers. Or is the goal of the system to make things better for adults? So question 0, you've now muddied. Yes.
So because people have entertained my ideas, I'm certainly open, just as one trustee.
Who said anybody entertained your ideas?
Just because you're not entertaining it. I think I got a couple.
No, you got one of your goals through.
Maybe got it. Well, not yet.
Yeah.
So
pretty close though.
I've been through the fire before.
Yeah.
No, I mean, complete agreement with exactly how Dustin just phrased this, because having gone through this process the first time, I'm surprised AJ hasn't talked more, because he really hammered it. He really hammered home this theory of how you get to student outcome goals and the difference versus the inputs and the outputs. But I am certainly open to entertaining the idea of how we would translate elements of this input into a particular student outcome goal or an element of the outcome goal. I don't have the time or energy or maybe even the want to try to create that. That said, were you to come up with some creative way to translate that into what we're trying to accomplish with student outcome goals, I think it behooves you to also think about the holistic nature of recruitment and retention of our educators. We do have a lot of educators that churn out of this system. You're a principal. What type of supports were in place for you to determine the objective value of the people that were placed in front of you to hire? We literally select teachers in this state. We're getting better at it, but we literally select teachers like scouts do in baseball. It's a gut factor. Yeah, this person's going to do pretty good because they came from this area. Or yeah, this person's, they look like they did good the past couple years in their district, so they're going to be good here. And what we've come to determine is that is the most unscientific way to identify valuable educators. So if we're going to figure out a way to create a student outcome goal on this input, it's my hope that is an element of the goal. Because we're going to continue to be in a place where we are filtering talent, and the only way for us to determine whether or not that talent was actually substantive is at the end of the year after a child's been screwed. We have the ability, I think, to change the game utilizing the foundation that TEI now provides us. So it'd be really interesting to see what you can come up with on that end. And even if it doesn't become a goal, it's my hope that in the constraint process that we set up, that's factored into constraints.
Yeah, I think nobody is arguing here that teacher quality is unimportant. I think we all agree that it's critical. And he's going to have the data. He's going to ask his folks to keep improving that data to collect more information about why some schools aren't turning around maybe as fast as others, or why some grades and subjects aren't improving faster. That's all part of the board's responsibility in monitoring progress on the goals, to ask questions about, so we've indicated that we wanted to turn around X, Y, and Z schools. Is there some evidence that those schools are loaded with low-performing teachers? What's the administration doing about the recruitment and placement and professional development of those teachers that keeps those schools as low performing as they are? That's good board monitoring of a goal. But whether or not you need to turn that input into a goal itself, I think is quite another question, and it doesn't sound like we've got consensus on it.
But Mr. Castley or AJ, either one of you, can you, in your wide experience, give an example of a student outcome goal that's related to any aspect of teaching, whether it's stability of teaching, quality of teaching?
So,
Mr. Cashman?
Not real. I mean, you could kind of force one, but it would essentially be a participation measure, which is an output for all intents and purposes. Say by saying
So
90% of all of our kids will be taught by a highly qualified teacher.
Yeah, so that is an example of one.
so
I'm gonna have to have a maybe we can have a conversation about input versus outputs, but like when I read percent of seniors completing the FAFSA will increase from 67 to 77%. That sounds very similar to what y'all are saying is not.
I would agree. We should
A student outcome goals. Or if you also say the percentage of graduates.
yeah, I think
obtaining
that one
all
is.
of these,
You're absolutely right about that. I think the only reason it's in is because it's required.
and then the extracurricular ones as well. So I hear what you're saying, but
I would object to the stereotype of the extracurricular ones being in there as outcomes because we think they're correlated to student achievement. I mean, from my perspective, the reason, I mean, I wasn't.
say it again, please.
Ben made the point earlier, and I think I hear you echoing it, that the goal 5 or whichever number it is, the extracurricular one, is also an input rather than an outcome, because we're saying he made the point that it's correlated to student achievement, which is why it's on our list of goals. And I'm saying I don't think that that's why it's on the list of goals. We didn't say.
I wasn't in the room. I mean, I'm not saying that's why. I'm saying we have examples here that people are also arguing against, where, again, I'll read this, the percentage of seniors completing, you can change that. The percentage of seniors with a exemplary teacher will increase from, I mean, you can just plug in the language and it's the same.
Same as what?
It's the same sentence. I'm sorry,
If you look
GPA
at goal 5.
4.4, all of them. But GPA 4.4, the percent of seniors completing a FAFSA will increase from 67%.
Yeah, FAFSA is just in there because of HB3.
Okay,
I agree with you
the
about
percentage of graduates.
Yeah,
obtaining
it's
basic
basically an
certificates
input.
degree rate will increase from 1 point. You can change that and say the percent of graduates obtaining, the percent of graduates in front of an excellent teacher will be from X percent to X percent. I mean, I can go
That's
through
not
it.
an outcome, though. This is an outcome. That if they graduate with a certificate, that is what you're hoping to achieve. That is the outcome.
Well, then let me
Right.
So can,
Right.
now you're making me go through all
So,
that.
I mean, you could,
Yeah, I mean.
to carry this thing to an extreme, you could almost take any
that's
output
what
and translate it into an
what I'm
income
throwing
and vice versa.
That's
But at a certain point, you, as the board, have to decide which of these outcomes are the most important, both to reflect your community and also to give direction to the superintendent and his team about what it is they bear down on. No,
so
yeah,
may I go
Edwin.
back to that last thing you said? Because it says what? And I think we're getting away from the what, which I thought that was the purpose of the goals, to jump into the how. We're
Yes.
saying,
The
we
teachers-
want to take
the
the boat
teachers is
from.
the how.
We want to take the boat from here to here, right?
Yeah.
But superintendent, you can't do this or this or this or this, right? I mean, again, if we're saying, and I think Justin said it very well, the administration tells us if we do these things, the outcome is going to be where we're going to go. The what is no DNF schools, kids getting more certificates, graduating, the what we're asking them to do. And I think, and I was thinking about kind of trying to figure out some kind of other factors that correlate with student achievement. And then as soon as we go down that rabbit trail, we're now doing the how.
Yes.
We're jumping into
and
the
that's,
how.
That's really his job.
Right, and so we're saying, Captain, take the boat from here to here. But by the way, Captain, you can't, you can't do
Yeah,
this to the
Yeah, the more
coxswain,
constraints you put
can't do
on the
this, you-
superintendent, the
right.
more it it limits its degrees of freedom about how it is you can get the goals that you want.
Right, and so I thought this discussion was just about the where do we want to be?
Exactly.
What we don't want him to do, don't beat your sailors. That's more of a constraint.
Right.
So to bring it back, since
Yeah.
I was the one that posed that out there, I can actually, I see that. I'm all right with leaving that on the table on this part of the conversation. I think it is a critical part of either the constraints or part of the superintendent evaluation or incentive goals that needs to be explicitly laid out. But I do want to point out, like, the constraints that we set at the same time, which theoretically should drive us, CPM 1.1, which is about that low level of campus staff satisfaction, has actually gone the opposite way. So the constraints we're not paying the same attention to, and that's on the campus climate survey, which I think there are some other intrinsic issues that don't make that as representative as it necessarily is. So I think I'm all right with leaving it off the table as one of these student outcome goals that we're aiming for, but really having conversation about where else this fits as we go forward. And yeah, we signed the constraint thing.
So it does sound like the board is interested in, having the administration collect more detailed information about teacher retention, quality, and the like, as a way of better understanding the patterns of achievement, but not necessarily put it as a goal per se.
This has come up a few times, so I just want to jump in and clarify this point. Once the board has set its goals and constraints, the superintendent and the team have come back and said, here are progress measures for those. Then that set of metrics as a body, your goals and your goal progress measures, your constraints and your constraint progress measures, that is the set of data on which you evaluate your superintendent. The problem is if you have any other set of data outside of that all the other data sets that you have outside of just your goals constraints essentially serve to dilute the superintendent's focus. So if you have 10 things in the evaluation plus 5 goals and 5 constraints, your superintendent is now trying to think about 20 different things that he's leading toward. As a board, it is to the benefit of your students that you create as few things as are absolutely necessary for your superintendent to be focused on. Because my favorite analogy is, as a board, you get 1 gallon of gas. You get to choose how many trucks you want to divide it amongst. But don't complain when you try to put 1 gallon of gas and divide it among 20 different trucks and none of them start. Then what you really want to do is you want to use concentrated amounts of your fuel in as few strategic areas as necessary. And that's the challenge that you face as a board, is there are always going to be 50 priorities for a district of this size. Always. 100% of the time, that will be true. Your task is, what are the highest leverage, most critical ones that we focus on, and let's apply our fuel to those few tanks so that those trucks will actually drive.
Yeah. You're actually fairly close. I'm sorry, Dan.
No, go ahead, complete.
So you're actually fairly close. For the most part, you agreed on goal 1, 2 and 3, and 4. You've either sacrificed goal 5 or you've indicated that you might put something on extracurricular as an indicator. There is still open on the table that the administration is going to explore is how to build in an early childhood and how to build in a middle school. So what else are we missing in terms of other kind of broad themes? We've agreed that the superintendent's not going to lessen the kind of leading certification in pursuit of the big C goal under number 5. So what we're dealing with now is essentially how to organize it so we don't end up with any more than 4 or 5 goals, but you're largely there.
Can I
Does
throw-
that sound right or not? Yeah, Dan?
Yeah, I think that was a good summary. I wanted to go back to Goal 5, which is the goal about extracurricular activities. And my thoughts are in propinquity with Trustee Marshall's thoughts on this, that the goal to get students involved in extracurricular activities, it's not an input, it's an output. And the reason why I think it's an output is because being involved in these activities is part of educating the whole child, part of social and emotional learning. It is a way that we can measure that we're doing something else other than educating kids academically in the classroom. So I would be in favor of leaving Goal 5, the extracurricular activity goal, in there. I may want to tweak some of the numbers, but that's my point.
Okay, you've now got upwards of 7 goals if you do this wrong. You could do a student engagement under Goal 4 as a measure. To AJ's point, you've got you've got in place between 4 and 7 goals, plus whatever you're going to create as part of this incentive package, plus whatever other district-wide goals you might come up with that are not student-related.
And I guess my colleagues can let me know otherwise. I think we want to aim for 5. So, I mean, my understanding was the team was going to try to name the 7. Let me go back. Let me start there. Name the 7.
Well, we got Goal 1, the current 5,
Yeah.
plus a possible middle school, a possible early childhood.
So middle school, we weren't able to incorporate that into goals. Chief Ellis, I thought you were going to incorporate that into goals under the main one.
What I offered up was substituting Goal 5 for a middle school goal. But we can also, but we do that as an option, not both. And then also maybe putting part of the middle school, the middle years,
into Goal 4.
Goal 4.
And then there was also the F schools.
Yes, we haven't resolved that, whether or not we were going to do domain 1 or the A through F.
What is the additional early childhood?
That was Ben's initial about readiness.
I meant that as a KPI under
Right.
third
Yeah.
grade early learning. I don't think mean that as a
Okay,
different
we
goal.
had that as an option, either KPI or a goal, didn't we?
We,
I think
yeah,
Okay,
GPM.
we're going to do that GPM,
Yep.
okay.
And just to reiterate on the middle grades piece, like again, just for me, the condition would be, if we're gonna build it into a GPM of either Goal 1 or Goal 4, that there be our own DISD metric that we create that sums a set of the biggest correlates that predicts success at the middle grade level, and then just spits out a value that is a student outcome that we have created, just condensing all those data, so that way you don't have to have an entire goal within each of those things built out. All of those things are built into one academic predictor that we measure within a GPM underneath either Goal 1 or 4.
And I understand that, but the problem we've been trying to avoid is that we create and self-report stuff, because this would be our index that we create. When we like going to, if someone questions us, we like going to the TAPER report. It shows that it's externally validated somewhere. If we create our own index, then who's going to referee our own index?
But what I'm saying is that the index, not to belabor the point, so this is just really quick and then I won't make it. All of the data that we are pulling, those are data that we're already reporting.
Right.
I'm just suggesting we report it to ourselves in our own unique way, but it doesn't,
Oh, okay.
it doesn't devalue the objectivity of the data that is there, because it's already being reported. I'm just saying, we have one measure that says all of that in one measure to build it into it.
Yeah, I think, whether it's a goal or a GPM or something else, you can ask for whatever, data you want, but you can, if the whole board is in general agreement about it, sounds like they can do it. And you just tell the administration when it is you want that reported out. So did we not have the middle school as its own goal, or are we making it GPM?
Totally okay with it not being its own goal.
Okay.
As long as it's a GPM.
All right, then you've got room for number 5.
Okay, I just,
Yeah.
having to be the one that's gonna have to put this together with Cecilia. So I am concerned, though, that I can actually logically connect it to one of the existing goals as you just described it, right? Because each of our big goals are very specific data that we're looking for, not the grades that 8th graders obtained or how students did. So as I'm looking through the goals, but certainly I will do my best and we'll find a way to, I don't know that that's actually gonna make the most sense.
So you thought it was better under
I thought
1.
if we were gonna do it, that it needed to be a goal on its own.
And I think this conversation, y'all can take it back and put that together and say, here are the different options, because again, that's more compelling to me than extracurricular. Again, I think we've done extracurricular a long way. And that doesn't mean we stopped doing it, but is that more important than middle school if we can't find a really clear measure? The one question I still have is, do we come up with an idea about goal 1 about whether it's star domain 1?
No, we have
or
not.
something wider, broad spread,
we didn't-
nationally?
we
Because
did
I
not.
feel really strongly, I think, moving in that direction on that. I'm curious where everyone else is.
So let me make sure I understand the distinction, because in both Domain 1 and NAP, every student is tested.
No,
No. Domain 1,
only kids who take star.
only,
Well, but it's about it's grades 3 through 10.
and in NAP?
In different,
3, NAEP is maybe 4,000 students.
but
And
MAP.
it's a sample.
MAP is every student. And STAR is also in specific subjects.
Okay, and one is state and one is somewhat national.
I don't
right?
know, I don't know anything about math. We test every student, we have another
We do
test?
now, but the challenge, we just started. We have about 40 schools that have been using it, but we have 222 schools. This is the first year. We don't have a baseline, so we wouldn't be able to set goals, first of all, with MAP. I certainly have no issue with the assessment per se. But I just want to go back, because I was at the training with AJ way back when, and I just want, the whole intent, not that we couldn't still, back to Dr. Casserly's point, we could report out comparisons to national assessments, MAP in particular. We could have a report to the board as such, for, when we get the data, because it's also data that's only gonna come we're gonna have a baseline, and then we're gonna have the end of the year, right? And so we'll be able to see growth, we'll be able to see baselines over time, et cetera. But the Lone Star governance was because we're being held accountable in the state of Texas to a Texas standard. So certainly it's not my decision, I understand that. I just want to point out the reason we did that is because that is.
Which you're held accountable for.
That's what I'm held accountable for.
Right.
Yeah, my take is, I think the board is gonna have to make a decision. I, again, having played, some role in the development of our governance work at the agency, would be the first to say, if the board, wants to look at a national data set rather than a state or a local, data set, then by all means do so. But what you all just have to think through is exactly the point that you're bringing up, is what is it that is most important to us to know? Let me back, what is it that's most important to us to be able to predict? Because the value of all this exercise is, one, that it will drive adult behavior change in your administration that ideally will accrue to the benefit of your students, and two, for you all to be able to monitor that so that you can meaningfully predict what is likely to happen at the end of the school year. So you're not waiting till the game is over to figure out whether or not you won or lost. You've been watching the scoreboard all along. And so if you want to be able to predict performance within the state, then you're probably going to need to use a state data set. If you want to predict performance using your own internal school performance framework, then use an internally derived assessment. If you want to predict performance relative to a national set of colleagues, then use that. But what is it that you want to see adult behavior move in relation to, and what do you want to be able to be predicting is going to be different by the end of the year. Those are the things that I would encourage you to think about when you're deciding which summative data set do we want to focus on.
In addition to what Trustee Foreman said, if you don't, what you measure is what you pay attention to. And the state said you can have local accountability, but by God, 50% has to be state accountability. And you can have, but you can do the other 50%, but you can't waive that 50%. So what we're saying is, if we don't do domain one, that it's not that important to us. So you could have the counter effect of the number of A's and B's and D's and C's schools going the other way because we're paying attention to MAP. We're not paying attention to what we're held accountable for.
Okay, so just to get back to the point that Ben was making about using one of the national standards versus domain one. If you use one of the national standards, then you have to pay attention to all the kids, not just the kids in the testing grades. Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, I think two conversations. I think are we aiming national or are we aiming state? I think we have a lot of state goals in our third grade, and in CCMR, that's again a state goal. We've got state goals. Do we want to have all state goals or do we want a national goal? I think that's question number one. As far as the metric, I think administration can figure out what makes sense if that's the direction we want to go. I personally think we should be aiming at a national level on that. And then as far as STAR goes, in domain one, it's just anyone who takes STAR, which is at all grade levels from 3 through 8th grade, but in different subjects also. But it doesn't include 2 and 1, etc.
Yeah, NAEP is not a predictive measure at all.
Yeah.
Well, just remember though that is to Trustee Mackey's point. That's also why we have specifically goals 2 and 3 that Derek has, because those are specifically for grade 2.
Right.
Using the Texas KEA, and in fact that's where we wanted to use MAP so that we would have time to set so we're with you wanting to make sure we're representing all of the students.
My conversation was just more national versus state.
Okay, so I think the administration has said, though, that if we use domain one, we could still take the map
Yeah.
and report it out.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Yep.
So I think
We could also add two numbers together to have one value. Or maybe just your own intellectual consideration. You literally could say we're going to add map and we're going to add.
So see, I want you to average averages.
No. No.
Yeah.
Statisticians are gonna tell you.
No.
Yeah. I just want to say, I'm convinced we should use domain one, and we should
Okay.
continue to have
Good.
we should have the map as a reference.
Are we there on
Yes.
domain one? Okay. Okay, the last thing we've got is number 5, if it's back on the table again. If we're putting some of these other things in as indicators and not as goals.
Well, I still firmly believe we need to have the number of IR schools on there. And it occurred to me earlier that the reason y'all might be calling it a constraint is because I'm phrasing it in a negative way rather than a positive way. But it would be a goal if we phrased it as
Convince your colleagues.
We have all A, B, C, and D schools. And in year 2, we have all A, B, and C schools. And year 4, we have all A and B schools. Right? Like that's saying the same thing, but it's phrased positively instead of negatively.
I'd be interested to hear Caster and AJ's response, because I agree. I think it seems like when you flip the language, it moves from a constraint to a goal, based on what we're hearing.
Well,
earlier.
it could, except it wouldn't be a student outcome goal.
School outcome goal.
Yeah, it'd be a school outcome goal.
Having all kids in A and B schools isn't a student outcome goal?
It's a participation goal.
Yeah.
It's more of an output goal, I think. But I mean, you can.
That is the epitome of an outcome, right? That's like saying 100% of our kids are in an A or B school.
I think the argument that I hear what you're saying. The argument that Casserly is making is that when a child shows up at an A-rated school, that's not an indicator of what that child did, because they could have come from a different school entirely, they could have come from a different district. So the fact that they showed up at a campus that's A-rated isn't describing what that.
Doesn't make them A-rated.
That's the argument he's making. What I actually hear you saying, isn't about, you're not as interested in our students showing up in A, B-rated schools as much as are we performing at the A, B level?
Right, and the school became an A because all the kids that were there were doing well enough for it to be an A.
Yeah, but the difference matters because of the mobility that you face.
Right, if every school in the district's an A or a B, then they can be mobile all they want because all the schools are doing
Absolutely.
well. I mean, I can't think of anything that we could do as a district that would impact more children than getting to all 8 and B schools. I mean, if the superintendent were to ask me, what's one thing I want him to go do, I would say, go make all of our schools A's and B's.
Yeah, and so what I hear you saying is you'd want to propose a fifth goal to replace the extracurricular goal with one that says the percentage of our campuses that earn a or B rating will increase from X to Y by Z. That's essentially what you're asking.
Yeah, although I wouldn't put the first part of your sentence as words in my mouth. I'm not lobbying for it to replace goal 5. What I would argue is that it's the most important goal that we've discussed all day, so I don't care. I mean, if we want to stick to 5, I would eliminate all 5 of the ones we currently have and make this the number 1 one. I'll leave it to my colleagues about which one.
And then bump the rest of them down to 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave it to my colleagues about which one it replaces, but I definitely think it should be on the list.
Okay, you could replace all of them too by saying, 100% of our students will graduate and get into a competitive college and university. Eliminate everything else.
Not just college, right?
Right, or career.
Yeah, or military, yeah. That's true.
So your request, Chairman, was, what would something like that look like? Now you all have to decide is essentially what the distinction that you're working with. On one hand, you have a set of proposed goals here that are really looking at the core underlying metrics. And the idea of going with a goal that's focused on A and B campuses that earn A and B rating is then you're looking at a composite indicator rather than kind of one of the constituent indicators. Yeah, because whether you have A or B rating, that's based on 100 different things that all come together as a composite and give you a final summative rating. I happen to think that summative ratings are incredibly valuable for some things and not for others, but that's really what you all are deciding is, do we want to use a summative rating as a way of driving performance improvements in our school system, or do we want to use the constituent metrics as a way of driving performance improvements? And honestly, I think either one of those can work for you. That's a decision for you all to make.
Mr. Superintendent, do you have advice for the board on this?
Yeah, couple of things, just to say, we have a hard stop in about 20 minutes because we have a hearing at 5 o'clock next door.
You're pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my point is that there's, I don't know that, I can't argue against it. It's something that's gonna be part of our DNA anyway, and if it can be an incentive, and we can keep extracurricular, it's more holistic. It looks like we hold to this scarlet letter that we hate, and it looks like we're pivoting our whole organization to the scarlet letter that I argued against and got beat down on. And so I would rather be more aspirational, keep the extracurricular, if I had my preference, and then make this an incentive. And we get the incentive, we get it done.
Well,
But,
we're talking about using your DISD rating system, though, not the state one, right?
yeah, but the state says you can't give your way, you can't local your way out of D or an F.
D or F, that's correct.
The state says you get a D or an F.
Then you have a D or an F.
Yeah.
And now, so you get a D or an F. So it's just not me, what we're gonna do by God is get rid of F schools. I don't wanna be walking around, what are you doing this year? I'm getting rid of all F schools. What else you doing? I'm getting rid of all F schools. I don't want that narrative out there. It's just not inspiring.
I agree.
So are you suggesting then just kicking that over to the incentive pool? And keeping goal 5 as a more holistic,
Making goal 5 tougher with the other metrics a
Yeah.
lot more robust.
Or switching it for middle school if that's determined.
Or switching it to middle school.
And I would just,
Well,
yeah,
middle-
I would prefer to switch it to
yeah,
middle
middle school, I think we're folding into 1 or 4,
No,
right?
maybe
I countered and said I didn't think I could work it in. I would rather it be an extra, an additional goal. So I would think that then replacing the current goal 5 of extracurricular with the middle school as a goal 5 is
Yeah,
I
I can
thought
live with
where,
that, yeah.
I thought that's what I,
Okay,
so that
We
we
can,
still
we
have
can get
5.
that out real
I
quick.
could get that out.
So Chief Elizondo, you all will propose one that includes middle school as the 5th,
Yes.
and the other one that's extracurricular, and then middle school we placed, I guess, in 1 or 4?
If it can be
And
done.
then a goal progress measure in 4.
4.
okay.
But it's gonna be very difficult to come up with that, so I think Stephanie and my staff prefers to have the 5th goal for many years.
Correct.
Okay, so it sounds like you're there. We've got some staff work to do here in terms of getting the wording right and the categories just right. But you've stayed within a reasonable number of goals. You've got other priorities like middle school and early childhood and turnaround or low-performing schools taken care of. You've got the domain thing taken care of. Edwin, what have you
What
have you got?
I just, we have to figure out a way how to stick the middle school someplace else, because we just can't take the pedal off the extracurriculars. Just my opinion.
So I think you heard from the superintendent that he wanted them or recommended having them in his incentive. Is that?
He mentioned both.
Right. Right, right.
Just one clarification on domain 1. I know we talked about leaving this domain 1, but as a GPM, including something like a national assessment, like MAP, like whatever makes sense, was that still a consideration? Because I think it should be something we look at as for all students. So I was just asking about that, not just the kids before 3rd grade.
If it is predictive, then it would be
Yeah.
highly appropriate for your administration to
MAP is
consider.
predictive.
If it is not, if the progress measures for them to be a progress
Yeah.
measure have to be predictive of the goal.
Right.
And so if they have, data that is actually predictive of the goal, then yes. But they'd probably have to go figure that out because it almost certainly doesn't come with a map to star.
And if they're not predictive, then why? Then I would need to hear what's the reasoning for why we're doing it anyways.
No, not
above.
predictive of that specific goal. They may be very useful for other things.
Sure.
Formative assessments.
I would just ask us to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, the correlation,
So my caution is in being MAP can be predictive, make sure it's predicting the right stuff.
Yeah, that's all.
Because it without some recalibration, it won't necessarily. I'm sorry to say.
well, the correlation between MAP and STAR is between 0.73 and 0.84, so it is. But,
Wow.
but we would still have to go align it to MAP.
Correct me if I'm wrong from the training. GPMs, though, I have to be able to monitor them more than just one time.
Multiple times per year, that's correct.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's not useful to you.
Otherwise, I can't respond to the data.
Yeah.
But don't you take MAP 3 times a year?
You do it 3 times a year, right? On MAP.
Well, is that what we
Yvonne, I think Dr. Duran is.
Yeah, one of the things about MAP is that we waited until they came out with the Spanish version, because in STAR, whether we like it or not, STAR has
only
both
English.
languages. And so one of the things that in working with Cecilia and with the company, we know it's going to take at least 2 more years before we can really call it a solid assessment. So right now, we purchased it as our universal screener, and for that, it really works well. Also, we chose to use the map starting in second grade. So although it can go down all the way to kinder, we chose to start at second grade because we have other measures right now for kinder and first. So that's the conundrum right now, is that we can't agree to do something that we're not gonna really begin using it in a reliable fashion for 2 more years.
So have we thought through the implications of adding more tests? Because, I mean, we're already doing STAR and ACPs, and now we've got MAP 3 times a year on top of that.
It's, this one, we did talk about that.
You're
Right.
replacing
It's
iStation, right?
replacing,
iStation.
it's not
But iStation's only for the younger kids. I mean, you go through
Right.
9th grade in iStation?
Eighth grade.
Really?
Achieve 3,000 is
Which
another
is,
one.
which is
Wow.
okay.
I thought it was
Okay.
only in middle school, so iStation is in middle school?
Uh-huh.
I thought it was only
No, it
elementary.
goes through 8th grade.
All right, we didn't wordsmith everything. If we did, we would be here all night and into tomorrow, but I think we've got the concepts and the priorities set, and the staff is clear about what it needs to do to translate it into a set of goals.
So my thing didn't make the cut, is that what you're saying?
It's not too late. I want someone to tell him no.
Apparently not. It went into the constraint, it went into the incentives.
What?
Yeah.
What? How softly you put it?
Apparently not.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, this is why they pay you the big
What did he
money.
say?
Yes,
I didn't hear
Stephanie.
what-
Can I ask the board to just confer that we have it down right as we go?
Yep.
Okay, so goal 1 with domain 1, knowing that map, we could create a baseline and we could have it phase in since it's given 3 times a year. We'll do it similar to the way Derek has already shown. We'll work a GPM in with map so we can still reflect some of the national kind of context. Goal 2 is still early learning with a focus on reading. Goal 3 is early learning with a focus on math. Goal 4 is the CCMR with some changes to the GPMs that were discussed. And goal 5, we're leaning towards middle school, encompassing all of those areas so that we could have a good metric that would be able to demonstrate growth specifically for middle school.
No, I think,
Middle grade
I think
status.
goal 5, it stays the.
We want to see both choices.
You want to do both ways, okay, okay.
Mr. Superintendent, well, your team was busy coming up with these goals. One of the things that you all identified was how much growth we can make. I think that some of them had like, we think we can grow by 12 points over 5 years, things like that. When you all are setting those goals, are you thinking about access to available resources as a part of your calculation of how much growth you can expect?
Yes.
So if you had like $100 million more, instead of seeing 12-point growth, you think, hey, we could do like 15-point growth, something like that.
So you're expecting another 100 million, right?
And so here's what
That's an important point.
Every single time the board adds more goals, the superintendent's behavior will be exactly what you just heard, is that he's going to think about the universe of goals in the context of the available resources. So when you have 3 goals, you think of the available resources to be applied to those 3, and maybe the jumps can be a little bit bigger. If we have 4 goals, then those jumps go a little smaller. If we have 10 goals, those jumps go a lot smaller. And so just one thing to be mindful of, I just want an expectation setting for the board. You're absolutely correct. You all can absolutely do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many goals you want. Just as a reasonable expectation as board members, expect that it is a reasonable behavior for the administration to go back and to shorten the amount of growth that they think they can get in goals 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Who invited this guy?
To accommodate for the conservation of resources. The reality is you have a finite set of funds. The more goals you apply for, what that generally means is that the jump for each of those goals is going to be commensurately smaller. So just expectation setting.
I liked where you started about the goals being more aggressive because they have more money.
Well, and I think that's absolutely the case. But then the question is, where do you find more money? Part of the way you find more money is have fewer goals. Is that you apply the same set of resources to fewer priorities.
Okay. Any other,
Gives you a stronger
Any other questions from staff?
Trustees.
All right. It wasn't pretty, but we did it.
All right, thank you for coming
Okay.
down and helping facilitate this.
Prettier than it has been.
Yeah, and ultimately, when the wording gets done, you're going to have a really fine set of goals and measures. As it was laid out in draft form by the staff, even at that point, you had a national model for what this kind of work looks like. You have now made that even better. So you ought to feel very, very proud of what you did. So anyway, congratulations, thank you. And I know you have another session coming up.
And Trump is downtown, so go around downtown.
Oh, yeah, I'll probably do a lift. I suspect the Lyft drivers all know.
All right, so
Okay.
y'all can small chat after the meeting. The time is 4:46 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
Thanks,
Great.
Mike.